"Hey." The sound he heard at 2 in the morning was his mother's voice. She called his name from the tree line, clear as a phone call. Except she had been dead for 6 months. The voice used a nickname only she had ever used, one he had not heard spoken aloud since her funeral. He was 11 miles from the nearest paved road, no signal, one tent, one flashlight with batteries he had not checked before leaving. He got out, but he left his pack, his sleeping bag, and one boot. He has never gone back for them. To understand what he heard that night, you have to understand why he was there alone in the first place. His mother died in April, not from something long and drawn out that gave everyone time to prepare. She was there, and then she was not. A Tuesday morning, a phone call from a number he did not recognize, and then the rest of his life without her. He was 31 years old, and he had not yet figured out what grief was supposed to feel like when it moved that fast. So mostly, it did not feel like anything. It felt like a room with all the furniture removed, familiar walls, wrong proportions. She had taken him camping in the southern Appalachian range when he was a kid. Not every year, but enough times that the mountains felt like something that belonged to both of them. She was the kind of person who whistled while she cooked, who read trail maps with her finger tracing the contour lines, who knew which berries were safe and which ones you left alone. He had not thought about any of that consciously when he decided to go. He thought about it later. At the time, it just seemed like the right direction to point a truck. He told one person he was going, a coworker named Darren who sat 2 desks over and who he trusted to call someone if he did not check in by Sunday evening. He did not leave a detailed plan. He said he was going camping in the mountains and he would be back Sunday, and Darren said okay, and that was the whole conversation. He drove 4 hours south and east, into the ridges and hollows of the southern Appalachian backcountry, the kind of country where the cell signal starts dropping 40 minutes before you think it will, and the GPS reroutes you twice and then gives up. He had done his research. He knew the trail. He had the paper map, folded wrong in the glove box the way paper maps always end up, and he had the trailhead coordinates written in a notebook. It was not a reckless trip. It was just a solo trip, and there is a difference, and he understood both. He stopped for gas at a crossroads station somewhere in the last stretch of county road before the national forest boundary. The place had 2 pumps and a single overhead light that hummed against the dark. Inside was an older man behind the counter, heavyset, wearing a canvas shirt that had been washed so many times the color had gone out of it. The man barely looked up when he came in. He bought coffee in a paper cup from a machine near the door and paid for his gas, and that was almost the end of it. Almost. He had the trail map out on the truck dash when he went back to the pump. The man at the counter had come to the door of the station, not all the way out, just standing in the opening with his arms crossed. He looked at the map on the dash. He looked at the gear in the truck bed, the pack, the tent bag, the headlamp clipped to the outside of the pack. Then he said, quietly, almost like he was talking to himself, "You going up past the second creek crossing at night?" He said yes. He was aiming to be at the campsite by 10 or so. The man was quiet for a moment. Then, "Don't whistle up there. And don't answer if something calls you by name. I'm not fooling with you." He thanked the man and drove on. He filed the warning in the same place he filed most things said by strangers at gas stations after dark, as a local custom, as something colorful, as the kind of regional caution that means nothing specific and everything in general. He had heard versions of it before. Don't go in the woods at night. Don't hike alone. Don't forget your bear canister. It all runs together after a while. He reached the trailhead parking area a little before 9. One other vehicle was there, a dark green pickup, older model, parked near the back edge of the gravel with its rear end toward the trees. The hood was cold when he passed it. Nobody around. He figured another solo camper already in, already settled. He pulled on his headlamp, checked the batteries, felt them wobble a little under his thumb, weak, not dead, made a mental note to swap them from his pack's spare set when he got to camp, and did not do it. He shouldered the pack and started up the trail. 3 miles by headlamp in mountain terrain is not a fast 3 miles. The trail gained elevation in long switchbacks through stands of second-growth hardwood, then leveled into a narrow hollow where a small creek ran close to the path, and the sound of it echoed off the slope above. The ground was damp from rain 2 days before. Not muddy, but soft. His boots came back wet at the toes. He reached the campsite at 10:10. It was a flat clearing beside the creek, maybe 40 feet across, with a fire ring and a bear box. He did not build a fire. He set up the tent, used the small backpacking stove to heat soup in the pot it came in, and ate standing up with the headlamp off. Just the faint glow of the burner and the dark shapes of trees around him. He did not need the fire. The soup was warm, and the air was cool, and the creek made the kind of sound that is supposed to be calming, that hollow rushing sound that fills in all the edges of the night. And he stood there and thought about his mother without quite thinking about her directly. He thought about the fact that she used to whistle when she cooked. That was all. Just that. He put the pot away, hung the food bag on the bear line strung between 2 trees, took off his boots outside the tent flap the way he always did, and zipped himself in. He was asleep by midnight. Around 1 in the morning, he woke up. He was not sure at first what had woken him. The creek was still running. No wind to speak of. He lay still and listened, the way you do when you surface from sleep and the world feels slightly off, but you cannot say how. Then he heard it. It came from the ridge above the campsite, not from the tree line at ground level, but from up the slope, 200 feet or more above where he was lying. It was a sound that took him a moment to categorize. Not wind, not a branch. More like a single exhale, low and close enough to be distinct, but far enough away that it should not have carried. Mountain hollows do strange things with sound. He knew that. The creek carves the air in ways that make distance hard to read. He had read about it. He understood the acoustic logic. Then there was something else. A sound underneath the exhale, brief and gone before he could resolve it. Something that might have been a word. Might have been the creek bending through a gap in the ridge. Might have been wind finding a notch in the stone somewhere above him. He turned over, attributed it to the hollow, to grief doing what grief does to auditory processing, to thin air and an unfamiliar place, and the kind of half-sleep where the brain starts filling in sounds it expects to hear. He got close to sleep again. His breathing slowed. The creek ran on. At 2 in the morning, the voice came again. This time, it was not from the ridge. It was from the tree line on the west side of the camp, maybe 30 feet from the tent, from the edge where the headlamp light would have reached if he had turned it on, which he did not. And this time, it was not ambiguous. It was his name. His full name, and then the nickname his mother used, the one that was a contraction of his middle name that she had started using when he was about 4 years old, and that no one else in his life used. Not his father, not his friends, not his co-workers, not Darren. A name he had not heard spoken aloud by anyone since the last time he saw her. He lay completely still. He did not answer. He did not breathe correctly for a while. The creek ran on. Then the creek seemed to get quieter. Then the voice did not repeat, and the woods went still. And he lay there in the dark inside his tent with his eyes open and his hand on the flashlight, and he did not turn it on. He told himself it was a dream. that he had been half asleep. That grief does things to how you hear the world. He almost believed it. And then he heard it a second time. The second time the voice came, it was closer. And it said the nickname differently, the way someone says a name when they are standing just outside a door. He sat up, did not unzip the tent, just sat up in the dark with his back against the tent pole and the flashlight in his right hand, and his thumb on the switch, not pressing it. Outside, the creek ran. The woods were quiet in the way woods get quiet when something in them has changed. Not the comfortable quiet of nothing happening, but the specific quiet of something holding still. He worked through it. That is what he did. He was not the kind of person who spiraled. He ran the options the way you run through a checklist when something goes wrong, and you need to stay useful. Another camper. There had been another vehicle at the trailhead, so yes, another camper was possible. Someone who had come up a different spur, set up nearby, maybe heard him moving around and called out. A woman hiking at night was unusual, but not impossible. Creek noise carried strangely in a hollow like this, and a voice bouncing off the slope above could sound like it was coming from anywhere, could sound personal when it was not. And grief. He knew what grief could do. He had read about auditory hallucinations in acute bereavement. They were common. They were well documented. They were especially common at night in the first year, in places that carried emotional weight. He was 4 months out, and he was in the mountains where she had taken him as a kid. Of course, his mind was doing something with that, he almost convinced himself. Then the voice came again. This time it was slow, careful, like someone reading a word they were not totally sure of. His name first, full name, correct pronunciation, and then a pause, and then the nickname. 2 separate sounds with a half-beat of silence between them. That was wrong. That was the detail that got through his checklist and did not have an answer, because she never said them that way. She ran them together, his name folding directly into the nickname without stopping. One continuous sound she had said 10,000 times in 30 years, until it was as natural as breathing. This version separated them. Got the pieces right, but put a seam between them that should not have been there. Close, but wrong in a way that was worse than being completely wrong. Because completely wrong you could dismiss, but almost right means something tried. He noticed the wrongness before he fully understood that he had noticed it. It was physical, a small cold thing that moved through him from the chest out. He thought about his dog. He had not brought one. He did not own one, but he wished, specifically and with sudden force, that he had a dog with him. That thought surprised him a little. He had not thought about wanting a dog in years. Now he wanted one badly, because a dog would be listening too, and a dog's reaction would tell him whether what he was hearing was real or whether it was something happening only inside his own head. There was no dog. There was just the tent and the dark and the creek and the sound. He checked his phone. No signal. He had known there would be no signal. He had checked before he left the truck. Checking again was involuntary. The same way you check a door you know you locked. The screen lit up and showed him the time, and showed him 0 bars, and then went dark again. He thought about the trailhead. 3 miles. In the dark, on a trail he had hiked exactly once coming in, with a headlamp running on batteries he had already identified as weak. 3 miles was doable. He had done harder, but 3 miles in mountain terrain at 2 in the morning on weak batteries was not nothing, and the road from the trailhead to any kind of help was another 40 minutes of driving, and he had not told Darren where exactly he was, only that he was in the mountains, which from a rescue standpoint was functionally useless. Leaving was technically possible. Leaving was also a way to get hurt. Staying was not good either. Staying meant sitting in a tent with no signal and no dog, and a voice that knew the right name but could not quite say it right. He stayed. And that was when the gas station attendant came back to him in full. He had filed it and moved on. That is what you do with warnings from strangers at gas stations. You acknowledge them and move on, because most of them are nothing, and you would never go anywhere if you stopped for all of them. But now, sitting in the dark with his back against the tent pole and his knees pulled up and the flashlight in his hand, he heard it again, word for word. Don't whistle up there, and don't answer if something calls you by name. I'm not fooling with you, not, don't be scared, not, it's probably an animal, not, there are weird sounds in these hills. Specifically, don't answer if something calls you by name. The specificity of it was different now than it had been at the gas station. At the gas station, it had sounded like regional flavor. Now, it sounded like instruction. Like the man had known something that he was passing along in the only way a stranger at a gas station can pass something along, quickly, without explanation, before the other person drives away. He had not answered the voice. Both times it had come, he had not answered. He did not know if that was instinct or the warning working in him without his permission, but he had not answered, and he was going to keep not answering. He sat with his back against the tent pole in the dark, and he did not move, and he did not speak, and he listened. Here is the thing about real silence. You start hearing your own body. Your heartbeat becomes loud. The sound of your own breathing. The small shifts of your weight on the sleeping pad. The tent fabric pressing against the pole. All of it becomes audible in a way that it is not when there is other sound to fill the space. He sat there, and he heard himself, and he counted the sounds outside. Creak, wind, light, moving through the canopy above. A small animal somewhere in the leaf litter off to the east, brief, random. Normal sounds. He counted them because there was nothing else to do. And at some point, sitting there with his thumb still resting on the flashlight switch, he understood something. He was counting the sounds. He was listening and cataloging and waiting. And whatever was outside, whether it was a person, whether it was an animal, whether it was something that did not have a clean category, it had also gone quiet. It was also waiting. It had called twice and received no answer, and now it was holding still the way you hold still when you are listening for a response you did not get. He had been tracking it. Without meaning to, he had started listening for pattern. Call, pause, silence. Something outside was also counting. He did not sleep again. He sat with his back to the pole, and he waited for dawn, and he did not unzip the tent, and he did not turn on the flashlight, and he did not say a single word into the dark. 3 hours until first light. He had done worse. He would wait. He did not turn on the flashlight, because if he turned it on and swept it across the tree line and saw something, he did not know what he would do. So he sat in the dark and made a deal with himself. He would not look. That sounds like the wrong choice. He understood that even then. Every instinct about safety in the outdoors says you want information. You want light. You want to see what you're dealing with. But there is a version of information that does not help you. There is a version of seeing something that makes the next 3 hours impossible to survive in any functional sense. If he turned on the flashlight and there was a figure standing at the tree line, a person, an animal, anything with a shape, he did not trust himself to stay inside the tent and stay quiet. And staying inside the tent and staying quiet was the only plan he had. So he kept the deal. He did not look. It was 2:30 in the morning. He heard movement. Not from the tree line this time, closer. something moving across the camp perimeter, maybe 10 or 15 feet from the tent, in the leaf litter and damp soil between the tent and the dark. The sound was not crashing, not panicked, it was deliberate. A footstep, then a pause. Then another footstep, a few feet to the left of the first. Then a pause. Then movement again, this time pulling south toward the tent, and then stopping. He tracked it with his head, just his head, turning slowly, following the sound. His body did not move. His breathing went shallow and he held what air he had and he listened. And the movement stopped when his breathing stopped and started again when he could not hold it anymore. And he did not know yet whether that was coincidence or something worse. It was moving east first, then south. The tent was at the center of whatever path this was making, and he sat in the middle of it and tracked the sound and did not make a deal this time about not understanding what was happening. He understood what was happening. Something was walking around the tent. Not all the way around. Almost. It went east, then south, then west, then slowed. He was tracking it through sound alone, through the soft compression of wet leaves and the occasional shift of gravel near the fire ring, and the pattern was almost a complete circle. Almost. It stopped before closing the loop. It stopped directly in front of the tent door, the zipper side. Silence. He counted seconds. He got to 30 before the voice came again. It was right outside the tent door, not 30 feet away in the tree line, not from the ridge. Directly outside, barely above a whisper, so close that if the tent wall had not been between them, the breath of it would have reached him. The nickname. Just the nickname this time, not his full name first. And the rhythm was almost right. Almost. Still that half-beat gap in the wrong place. Still that slight wrongness in the timing, but closer than before. It was learning the sound. It was getting closer to correct. He did not answer. The gas station man's words were the only thing louder than the voice in that moment. Not the creak, not his heartbeat. Just that one sentence. Don't answer if something calls you by name. He held on to it the way you hold on to a rope. Not because it made the fear smaller, but because it gave the fear a shape he could work with. After the silence, the footsteps began again, moving away this time, north, back toward the tree line, and then they stopped. He sat for a long time after that without moving. At some point, the realization came to him in plain language, not as a feeling, but as a thought he could examine like a map. Whatever that was, it walked around the tent first. It found the entrance before it called his name. That was not a deer. A deer does not locate a zipper. That was not creek acoustics, because creek acoustics do not have feet. And it was not grief, because grief does not walk in a circle and stop at the door and whisper. He did not know what it was. He was not going to know tonight. That was acceptable. What was not acceptable was opening the tent flap before he could see clearly enough to know what he was walking into. He was not leaving until there was light. Not headlamp light, natural light, gray light. Enough light to see the difference between a shadow that belonged to a tree and a shadow that did not. He made that decision at roughly 2:45 in the morning, and he did not revisit it. The next hour was the hardest kind of waiting because nothing happened. The footsteps did not return. The voice did not return. The woods on the north side of the camp stayed quiet, and the creek ran on, and after a while the small animals came back into the leaf litter off to the east, and that was actually a comfort, the way a dog being calm is a comfort, because small animals in the leaf litter meant nothing. Large and alarming was immediately nearby. He breathed better after that. Not well. Better. Around 4 in the morning, the woods started making normal sounds again. an owl somewhere above the hollow. The creak picking up slightly, or maybe he was just hearing it more clearly now that whatever had been absorbing his attention was gone. A small knocking sound from somewhere in the upper canopy that was almost certainly a woodpecker working the dead wood, starting early or finishing late, ordinary in every way. And then he realized the creek had gone quiet. Not now, it was running normally now, but during the circling, during the 30 seconds of silence before the whisper at the tent door, the creek had gone quiet. He had not processed it at the time. His attention had been so completely on the footsteps and the voice that the absence of the creek had not registered consciously. But now, sitting in the approaching pre-dawn with his back still against the tent pole and the flashlight still in his hand, he understood that the creek had stopped during that interval. Or not stopped, creeks do not stop, but gone below the threshold of his hearing, as if something between him and the creek had absorbed the sound, as if something had been standing close enough and large enough to change what reached him. He replayed the gas station man again. The man had not said, "Be careful." He had not said, "Watch out for bears," or "There are some strange people up in those hills," or "The trails flood after rain." He had said, "Don't answer if something calls you by name." That was a specific instruction for a specific situation. People do not give specific instructions for situations that have never happened. At 4:30, the tent fabric began to show gray. Not much, just the difference between black and dark gray, the first suggestion of light coming into the fabric from outside. He sat for another 20 minutes. He watched the gray get slightly less dark. Then he reached outside the tent flap. He kept his eyes forward, not looking down yet, reaching by feel for the first boot. He found it. He pulled it in and put it on. He reached for the second. His hand found wet dirt. Flat, damp, where the boot had been. Just the impression in the soil where it had sat overnight. He reached further left, further right. He came up on his knees and put his head out of the flap and looked. One boot. One bare patch of damp dirt where the other had been. No print in the dirt beside it. No drag mark. No indication of how it had been taken or where it had gone or whether anything had stood there to take it. He sat in the tent door with one boot in his hand, and he looked at the place where the other one had been, and he understood that whatever had been outside his tent last night was not something that left footprints when it did not want to. He went back in. He put on the boot he had. He put on the wool sock over his bare right foot, and he packed the tent down as quietly as he could, and he put the pack on his back, and he walked out of that hollow and toward the trail, and he did not look back at the tree line. He did not look at the ridge. He did not whistle. One boot was gone, not moved, gone. The ground where it had been was wet from the night. There was no print next to it, just the flat, damp dirt where the boot had sat, and nothing else. He did a full inventory before he left the site, not because he doubted what he had seen, but because doing something methodical was the only way to keep his hands steady. Sleeping bag, present. Pack, present. Stove and fuel canister, present. Headlamp, present. Both trekking poles, present. One boot, gone. He went through it twice. The second time did not change anything. He dressed in what he had. Right foot in the remaining boot, laced tight. Left foot in the wool sock, which was thick enough to give him some protection on the trail, but not enough for anything he wanted to think about. He broke down the tent without rushing and without being slow about it. He kept his movements quiet and deliberate, and he did not let himself think past the next immediate task. Pack the tent body, pack the poles, compress the sleeping bag, clip the headlamp to the shoulder strap. Lift the pack, settle it, adjust the hip belt, done. Walking. The trail back to the trailhead was the same 3 miles he had hiked in, just reversed. and in the early gray light of a mountain morning, it looked different than it had by headlamp. Flatter somehow, more exposed. The trees on both sides were visible now as individual shapes rather than a collective dark, and the trail surface showed itself clearly enough that he could pick his footing without the headlamp. He did not turn the headlamp on. He wanted both hands free, and he wanted his eyes adjusted to the natural light. He kept his pace controlled, not running. Running on mountain trail with one boot and a full pack was how you got a turned ankle 3 miles from your truck at dawn, and a turned ankle here was not a small problem. He moved fast enough to feel like he was making progress and slow enough to stay on his feet. The first mile passed without anything. Just the trail and the trees and the sound of his own footsteps and the distant creek running somewhere below and to his left. His sock foot was wet within the first quarter mile. The trail was damp enough that every other step soaked through the wool. He noted it and kept moving. He did not look into the tree line. He made a decision about that early in the first mile. Looking into the tree line was something he could do, and it was something that would not help him. If there was nothing there, he would have spent energy on nothing. If there was something there, he would know it was there, and he would still be 3 miles from his truck. Looking did not change either outcome. He kept his eyes on the trail. The second mile had more elevation change. The trail dropped into a draw, and then climbed again along a ridgeline spur before descending into the section he remembered as the creek crossing. He had crossed it, coming in on the stepping stones, flat rocks in the creek bed that made a rough line across the water at the narrowest point of the trail. The creek had been shallow and easy then. Now, 2 hours into daylight with recent rain in the ground still draining, he could hear the water running louder before he reached it. He came around the last bend before the crossing and stopped. The creek was louder, running faster, but not dangerous. The stepping stones were still there, still usable, just slightly more submerged than they had been the night before. He could cross it. That was not the problem. The problem was on the far bank. His boot was there, set upright at the edge of the stepping stones on the far bank, at the exact spot where someone crossing the creek would step off the last stone and back onto the trail. It was sitting with the toe pointing forward, pointing toward the trailhead, pointing in the direction he needed to go. He stood on the near bank and looked at it for a long time. The woods on both sides of the creek were still. Nothing moved in the trees. Nothing moved on the trail behind him or ahead of him. The creek ran over the stones, and the boot sat at the edge of the bank, and the morning light came flat and gray through the canopy and turned everything the same dull color. And he stood there, and he did not move, and he did not make a sound. He thought through it. Objectively, clinically, the way he had been trying to think through everything since 2 in the morning. One possibility. Another hiker had found the boot at the campsite after he left and carried it down the trail and left it here for him to find. That was a reasonable thing for a considerate person to do. Hiker finds someone's boot at a campsite, figures the owner came down the trail, leaves the boot somewhere visible. Possible. Except he had been watching the trail behind him, and there had been no one. And the campsite was 3 miles back, and he had been moving at a good pace, and for someone to have found the boot, recognized it as gear belonging to a camper who had already left, and then caught up to him on the trail without him hearing or seeing them. And that was not a reasonable sequence. And the boot was at the creek crossing, on the far side. Half a mile off the main trail on the spur he had taken, at the specific point where the trail met the water, oriented in the specific direction he needed to travel. That was not a courtesy. That was not a coincidence of placement. That was arranged. He crossed the creek on the stepping stones, one boot and one wet sock, and he picked up the boot from where it had been placed, and he turned it over and checked it. No damage. No smell beyond leather and trail. The inside was dry. Not damp dry the way something gets when it dries out after being wet. Dry the way something is when it has not been wet. He had left that boot outside his tent in the mountain air overnight, on damp ground, and it had come back to him dry on the inside. He stood in the creek bed with water moving around his ankles, and he held the boot and he looked at it and he put it on. He laced it, he stood up, he kept walking. He did not allow himself to think about the boot too specifically for the rest of the hike out. He stored it. He put it in a part of his mind he could access later when he was somewhere that was not 3 miles of mountain trail, with trees on both sides, and no signal, and nobody who knew exactly where he was. Later? He would think about it later. The last mile went fast. He was moving on adrenaline by then, the specific kind that does not make you feel fast or strong, but just keeps your legs turning without you having to think about it. The trees thinned out in the last quarter mile, where the trail approached the trailhead clearing. He could see the gravel of the parking area through the last stand of hardwoods before he cleared the tree line. His truck was there, exactly where he had left it. The green pickup was also still there. Same spot, same angle. Rear end toward the trees, driver's side, front wheel, slightly over the edge of the gravel the way it had been the night before. He had been in the backcountry for one night. The truck looked like it had been sitting there for a week. That was not something he could explain precisely, more of an impression than a fact. The way a vehicle looks when it has been rained on and dried and rained on again. The way a windshield looks when the temperature has cycled through it a few times. He had been gone since 9 the previous evening. 14, 15 hours. The truck looked older than that. The windshield was fogged from the inside, not the outside. The fog that builds on the inside of a vehicle comes from respiration, from someone breathing inside the vehicle over a period of time. He loaded his pack into the bed of his truck without approaching the green pickup. He kept it in his peripheral vision. He did not look directly at it, in the same way he had not looked at the tree line on the trail. He got in his truck, started the engine, and pulled out of the parking area and onto the access road without looking in the rearview mirror. He did not look in the rear view until he was on the paved county road, and the trailhead was behind a hill and out of sight. The road behind him was empty. He drove directly to the Crossroads gas station. It was barely 7 in the morning. The station was open. The overhead light still hummed. But the man behind the counter was not the man from last night. This one was younger, maybe mid-20s in a different shirt, already refilling a coffee machine and not paying particular attention to who came through the door. He bought coffee. He stood at the counter. He chose his words carefully, kept his voice even, asked casually whether the older man who had been working last night was around. The younger man looked at him, not suspiciously, just the particular look of someone who is trying to decide if the question is strange. He doesn't work nights, he said, hasn't worked nights in years. He doesn't like being there after dark. He nodded, thanked him, took the coffee. He sat in his truck in the station parking lot for 15 minutes and drank the coffee and did not turn on the radio. He did not tell anyone about the boot for almost 2 weeks. The detail that bothered him was not that it had been taken. It was that it had been brought back and left in the right direction. He made it to the trailhead. The other car was still there. Same spot, same cold-looking vehicle. He had been in the backcountry for one night. He could not understand why it looked like the car had not moved in a week. But that was already behind him now, the trailhead and the green truck and the fogged windshield. And he was on the county road with both hands on the wheel and the coffee going cold in the cup holder and the mountains still visible in his mirrors, ridge after ridge dropping back into the morning haze. He drove the way people drive when they are keeping themselves together by concentrating on the immediate task. Speed, lane, distance, the next curve, the next straightaway. He did not let his mind go back to the creek crossing or the tent or the sound outside the zipper. Not yet. Later? Later, he would sit somewhere safe and go through all of it and try to build something coherent out of it. Right now, he drove. The county road ran roughly northeast, following the contour of the ridge before dropping into the wider valley where the state highway began. It was a narrow road, one lane in places, with soft shoulders that fell away into drainage ditches on both sides. In the morning light and the low ground mist, it had the particular look of mountain roads in early autumn. Gray-green, slightly wet, the tree line close on both sides, the pavement marked with old patchwork that had been there long enough to become part of the road's texture. He had driven roads like this his whole life. They did not bother him. About 4 miles out from the trailhead, he came around a long left curve and passed a gravel pull-off on the right side of the road. The kind of pull-off that exists on mountain roads for no particular reason. Just a widening of the shoulder where the road crews left extra gravel at some point, and it became a place people pulled over to look at maps or let faster vehicles pass. There was a woman standing at the edge of it. She was facing away from him, looking into the tree line. Older, from what he could see, wearing a heavy coat that was too warm for the morning, which had turned mild with the sun coming up. She was completely still. Not the stillness of someone who had just stepped out of a car and stretched. The stillness of someone who had been there for a while. He slowed without meaning to, the way you slow when you see a person standing alone on the side of a mountain road at 7 in the morning, because the ordinary question is whether they need help. She did not turn when he slowed, did not react to the sound of his truck at all. Just stood there at the edge of the pull-off with her back to the road and her face toward the trees. He drove past. He looked in the rearview once, about a quarter mile down the road. She had not moved. She was a small figure in the mirror, still facing the tree line, coat too heavy for the morning, completely still. He drove on. 3 miles further down the county road, another pull-off on the right side. Same gravel, same shape, same positioning relative to the road, different location. He came around a right curve and there she was, same coat, same stance. Facing the trees, not the road, completely still. He did not slow down this time. He accelerated, and he kept his eyes on the road ahead, and he did not look in the rearview mirror again until he was on the state highway with the county road and everything on it a solid 10 miles behind him. The highway was empty. The mirror showed only asphalt and the faint smear of mountains in the far distance. He drove home. 4 hours, the reverse of the night before. He stopped once for gas and did not go inside the station. He paid at the pump and got back in the truck and drove. He did not turn on the radio. He did not call Darren to say he was back. He texted instead 2 words, "back early," and put the phone face down on the seat. He got home at noon. He unloaded the truck and put the gear in the hallway, and he did not unpack it. He lay down on his bed in his clothes and slept until the following morning. The first week back, he was functional but not quite present. He went to work. He answered emails. He ate food without paying much attention to what it was. The night in the backcountry had taken on a quality he had not expected. Not more frightening in retrospect, but more dreamlike. The way experiences sometimes lose resolution when you try to hold them up to ordinary light. He kept reaching for it and finding that the specific texture of it was harder to access than it had been in the moment. He could state the facts. Voice at the tree line. Footsteps circling the tent. Boot gone, boot returned. But the facts, without the sensory experience of them, felt thin, like a summary of something rather than the thing itself. Except the boot. The boot stayed clear, He threw it away. He could not fully explain why, only that looking at it bothered him in a way that looking at the matching boot did not. He bagged both of them without examining them further and put them in the trash and ordered a new pair online and did not think about it again for a few days. Then he thought about it constantly for a week. The second week, he told Darren a shortened version. Not the voice, not the circling, just the broad shape of it. A strange night, sounds he could not explain, came out earlier than planned. He mentioned the woman on the road, more as a strange footnote than anything else, described what he had seen. Older woman, heavy coat, standing at two separate pull-offs 3 miles apart, facing the trees both times, not responding when he slowed. Darren listened and then pulled out his phone and spent a few minutes on a local Facebook group for the county. Community page, the kind that every rural county has, where people post about road closures and lost dogs and church events and occasionally something stranger. He found a post from 2 weeks before the trip. Someone asking if anyone had seen a woman matching that description standing along the county road that ran past the national forest boundary. Heavy coat, older, facing the tree line at the edge of the road. The post had no replies. He looked at the post for a while. He did not comment on it. He asked the Park Service about the trailhead through their public contact form, keeping it general, asking about registration requirements for the backcountry site he had used, mentioning that there had been another vehicle in the lot when he arrived and when he left. The response came back 5 days later, friendly and informational. Overnight visitors to that backcountry zone were required to self-register at the trailhead kiosk, which he had done. They had no record of another overnight registrant at that site during the weekend in question. They wished him well on future trips and mentioned the bear box maintenance schedule. No registered overnight camper, no permit on file for the green truck. He had not registered either, technically. He had filled out the paper slip at the kiosk, but had not checked whether there was supposed to be an online component. He checked. There was. His registration was incomplete. Whoever owned the green truck had either registered correctly through channels that did not leave a record he could access, or had not registered at all. He did not pursue it further. He did not know what pursuing it further would look like. The woman on the road had no follow-up that he could find. The Facebook post sat unanswered. He drove that county road once more, several weeks later, in daylight, going back through the area for reasons unrelated to the trip. He watched the pull-offs as he passed them. Both were empty. Just gravel and tree line and morning light. Ordinary in every way, the kind of detail you would never notice if you had not been looking. He noticed them. He noticed both of them and drove past without slowing and kept his eyes on the road ahead. The strange part was not the woman. The strange part, the part he kept coming back to, was the timing. The post asking about her had been made 2 weeks before his trip. Whoever had seen her and posted about it had seen her on that road 2 weeks before he drove it. And on the morning he drove it, she was still there. Or something that looked like her was still there. Or she was there again in the same places doing the same thing. He did not know how to think about that in a way that made sense, so mostly he did not think about it directly. He let it sit in the same place he had put the boot placement at the creek crossing, in the part of his mind where things went when they did not have answers yet. He never found out whose car that was in the parking lot. The Park Service told him all overnight visitors were supposed to register. He had not done it correctly. Neither had whoever owned that truck. Whether the truck had been there for one night or several, whether anyone had been sleeping in it or not, whether the fogged windshield meant what he thought it meant, none of that was something he could resolve from 4 hours away with a public contact form and a Facebook group. Some things stay open, he was learning that, not every detail closes. Some of them just sit there, facing the tree line, not turning when you slow down, waiting for something you cannot see. He did not tell anyone the full story for almost a year, not because he was afraid of being disbelieved, because every time he started, he got to the part about the boot, and then he could not explain the part that came after it. And that part did not happen in the woods. It happened at home. He gave himself a reasonable amount of time to be not okay, and then he went back to being okay. Or the version of okay that is mostly functional and only occasionally wrong. He went to work. He called his father on Sundays. He started running again, which he had stopped doing in the months after his mother died. And the running helped in the way that physical exhaustion helps, which is not the same as healing but is a useful substitute while you wait for the real thing. He saw a therapist for 6 weeks, a practical woman in a shared office suite who specialized in grief and who said useful things about auditory hallucinations and bereavement, and the way the brain reaches for familiar patterns when it is under sustained emotional pressure. He told her about the voice in the woods. He did not tell her about the boot. The hallucination explanation was not wrong. He knew that. The brain, under grief, does extraordinary things with sound, with pattern recognition, with the specific frequency of a familiar voice. There was good science behind it. He had read the papers. Bereaved people heard their loved ones with startling regularity in the first year, in the next room, on the stairs, in parking lots, on the phone before the signal connected. It was so common it had a name. It was documented across cultures and age groups and types of loss. He accepted it for the mountain. He accepted that a hollow in the Appalachian backcountry at 2 a.m, with a man who had lost his mother 4 months before, sleeping alone in a tent in the mountains she had taken him to as a child. He accepted that the voice at the tree line could have been his own mind doing the only thing it knew how to do with the grief, which was reach for her. He accepted that. He could not accept the apartment window. He lived on the 3rd floor of a building in a mid-sized city, a building that was quiet without being new, with solid walls and a courtyard-facing side and an alley-facing side, and his bedroom window faced the alley. The alley was not a through street. It had a dumpster and a utility pole, and a section of chain-link fence that nobody maintained. Nobody had a reason to be in the alley at 2 a.m. Occasionally, someone cut through it. He had heard it before, footsteps, sometimes voices, the occasional sound of the dumpster being accessed. Urban background noise. Normal. 3 weeks after he got back from the mountains, he woke up at 2 a.m. Not from a bad dream, not gradually. He came up out of sleep the same way he had come up in the tent, fully and suddenly, with the immediate sense that something outside the ordinary had already happened, and he had woken into the aftermath of it. He lay still. His bedroom was dark, the building was quiet, and from the alley 3 floors below his window a female voice called his name. Not his full name, the nickname. He got up, he went to the window. He stood to the side of it first, not directly in front of it because some instinct from the mountain was still running in him, and it said, "Do not present yourself as a silhouette in a lit window until you know what is below." He looked down into the alley at an angle. The alley was empty. The utility pole, the dumpster, the chain-link fence, the ambient light from the street at either end. Nothing else. No person. No shape that could have been a person that stepped away quickly. The alley was maybe 60 feet long and he could see both ends from his window, and both ends were empty. He stood at the window for a while. He went back to bed. He did not sleep again before the alarm. He told himself what he had told himself in the tent. Street noise. A voice carrying from the street at the wrong angle, bouncing off the building in a way that put it under his window instead of on the sidewalk. His name was not an unusual sound. People called each other names. At 2 in the morning, from 3 floors up, through a closed window, a name called in the street could resolve into anything. It could resolve into his name if his brain was primed to hear his name, if his brain was still doing what bereaved brains do, which was reach. 2 nights later, at 2 in the morning, it happened again. This time, he did not go to the window. He lay in bed, and he stared at the ceiling, and he listened to the voice say the nickname twice, and then stop, and he did not move, and he did not answer. And after a while, the silence came back, and he lay in it until the alarm. That was the week he started doing something he had not done before. He found the gas station through county business listings. It took about 20 minutes of searching, cross-referencing the intersection he remembered with the distance from the trailhead, narrowing it down to 2 stations in that part of the county, and then finding the one that matched the description. 2 pumps, crossroads location, the general dimensions of what he remembered. He found a phone number. He called on a Tuesday afternoon. A man answered, young-sounding, the same energy as the one behind the counter on his way out. He asked if the older gentleman who worked evenings was available. There was a brief pause on the other end. "We don't have evening staff," the man said. "Station closes at 9. Has for about 3 years now." He kept his voice even. He asked if there was an older man who worked days, described the build, the canvas shirt, the age range. "That sounds like it might be the owner," the man said. "But he doesn't work the counter anymore, and he definitely doesn't work evenings. He doesn't come in after dark. He doesn't do that." He thanked the man and ended the call. He sat with his phone in his hand and he thought about the charge on his card. He pulled up his bank statement on his phone. He scrolled back to the date of the trip. There it was, a charge from that station, from that night. Time stamped at 11:47 p.m. 2 purchases, gas and coffee, correct amounts. The station's name on the statement, the location data matching the intersection he remembered. The charge was real. The stop was real. The transaction had processed and cleared, and sat in his account history like any other purchase. The station had been closed for 3 years at 9 p.m. He had stopped there at 11:47 p.m. and bought gas and coffee from a man who should not have been there, who had given him a specific warning about a specific situation he was about to walk into, and then had not been there when he drove out the next morning. He stared at the statement for a long time. He thought about the warning, "Don't whistle up there, and don't answer if something calls you by name." He thought about the tent and the circling footsteps, and the 30 seconds of silence before the whisper at the door. He thought about the boot at the creek crossing, placed upright, toe pointed toward the trailhead, dry on the inside. He thought about waking up in his apartment at 2 in the morning to a voice in an empty alley 3 floors below. He did not know what the man at the gas station was. He did not know what had been outside his tent. He did not know if the thing that had circled the tent and the thing that had called to him from the alley were the same thing, or different things, or whether either of them were things in any sense he could work with. He did not know why the warning had come from someone who should not have been there, from a station that was closed, from a man who, according to everyone who knew him, would not be in that place after dark. He only knew that he had followed the warning. Both times the voice had come in the mountains, he had not answered. In the apartment, both times it had come to the alley, he had not answered. And he was here. He was functional and here, and the thing that had learned his name and learned the sound of the nickname and gotten closer to right each time it tried had not gotten what it was trying to get, whatever that was, because he had not given it the response it was practicing for. He does not know what the man at the gas station was. He does not know why the warning came from someone who should not have been there. He only knows that he followed it, and he thinks that is why he is still here. He still lives in the same city. He still drives through Appalachia sometimes when work requires it. He takes the highway now. He does not stop at crossroads stations after dark. He does not whistle. He does not answer when something calls his name from behind him. Those are not dramatic changes. That is the thing about how an experience like this settles into a life. It does not announce itself. It does not reorganize everything. It just adds a few small rules to the ones you already had, and after a while the rules become habits. And after a while the habits become the kind of thing you do without thinking, the way you check both ways before crossing a street even when the light is green. He does not whistle after dark. He does not stop at pull-offs on mountain roads at dusk. He does not answer his phone after midnight if the number is unknown. He lets it go to voicemail and checks the voicemail in the morning, in daylight, with coffee in his hand. These are small adjustments. They cost him almost nothing. He pays them without complaint. He contacted the Park Service about 2 months after the trip. Once he had enough distance from it to write the inquiry without it sounding like what it was. He kept it general, framed it as a question about trail registration and permit requirements, mentioned the vehicle in the lot, asked whether there were any records of registered campers at that backcountry site during the weekend he had visited. The response was professional and helpful. No registered overnight campers at that site during that period. The green truck's description matched nothing in the permit system for that trailhead or the surrounding access points. They thanked him for reaching out and encouraged him to complete the online registration component on future visits. He looked at that email for a while. No registered campers. He had not registered correctly either, so his presence was also not on record. 2 trucks in a parking lot at a trailhead in the southern Appalachian backcountry, both invisible to the system, both unaccounted for. He did not know what to do with that information, so he filed it and moved on. The photograph of the partial print was still on his phone. He had taken it in the flat gray light of that morning, crouching on the south side of the campsite with the phone close to the ground, trying to get a clear image of the impression in the damp soil. He had thought at the time that it was a reasonable photograph. When he enlarged it at home, on his laptop screen, the resolution was not what he needed it to be. The heel impression was visible, deeper than the rest, and there was a suggestion of the overall shape, large, wider than his own foot, but the toe area was unclear. It looked like a print. It could not be confirmed as a print. It was the kind of image that proves nothing to anyone who was not already inclined to believe it. He sent it to no one. It sat in his camera roll between a photo of a grocery receipt and a picture of a trail marker. The boot he could not explain. He had tried. He had genuinely tried to construct a scenario in which a helpful stranger found a boot at a campsite, followed a spur trail half a mile to a creek crossing, and placed the boot upright on the far bank, oriented toward the trailhead. The scenario was technically possible. Every individual step of it was something a person could do. But the spur trail was not marked. It was not a through route. Someone would have had to know it went to the creek crossing, or would have had to follow his tracks, in the dark, before dawn, moving fast enough to arrive at the crossing before he did. And the boot was dry on the inside. That detail kept coming back. He had left it outside overnight in mountain air on damp ground, and it had come back dry. He had no explanation for that. He stopped looking for one after a while. His therapist, the practical woman with the shared office, had explained auditory hallucinations in bereavement clearly and compassionately, and with reference to research he could look up himself if he wanted to. He had looked it up. She was right. The phenomenon was real, well documented, and extremely common in the first year of grief. He accepted the explanation for the mountain voice. He told her so, She seemed relieved. In the professional way, therapists seem relieved when a client arrives at a rational framework. He did not tell her about the apartment. He did not tell her about the voice in the alley at 2 in the morning, at the same hour, on the same side of midnight, using the same name. Because the grief hallucination explanation required proximity to something that triggered the memory, her things, her photographs, a place she had been, a smell that associated with her. His apartment alley had none of that. She had never been to his apartment. She had never been in that city. There was no associative trigger in a utility pole and a chain-link fence and a dumpster. The explanation that worked for the mountain did not reach that far, and he knew it, and he did not want to sit across from his therapist and watch her try to make it reach. He stopped seeing the therapist after 6 sessions, not because it was not helping, but because he had gotten what he could get from it, and the rest of it he was going to have to carry himself. He carries it reasonably well. He does not camp alone. That is the biggest change in practice. He still camps, still goes into backcountry, still drives mountain roads and hikes trails, and sleeps in a tent in the southern Appalachian range sometimes. He just does not do it alone. He goes with his college friend Marcus, who is a competent outdoorsman and does not ask too many questions, or with a small group of people from a hiking club he joined in the winter after the trip. He leaves a detailed itinerary now. Not just with Darren, with someone who has agreed to call search and rescue if the check-in does not come. He carries a personal locator beacon on every backcountry trip. He bought it 2 months after the mountain, and he has not been into the backcountry without it since. He does not go into backcountry without a full itinerary left with someone who will actually act on it. That was the thing that scared him most, in retrospect. Not the voice, or the boot, or the fogged windshield. It was the recognition that if something had happened to him out there, if he had turned an ankle in the dark running for the trailhead, if he had made a wrong decision and walked the wrong direction on a trail he only knew from one pass through it, nobody would have known where to look. Darren would have waited until Sunday evening and then called his phone, which would have gone to voicemail, and would have waited another few hours before deciding to be worried. And by then, he does not complete that thought. He bought the locator beacon and he leaves the itinerary, and that is the answer to that thought. He visited his mother's grave in the spring, first time since the funeral. He had been avoiding it without quite admitting he was avoiding it, finding reasons the timing was not right. And then in March, he ran out of reasons and drove to the cemetery on a Saturday morning with a bunch of flowers from a gas station because the florist was not open yet, and she would have found the gas station flowers funny. He sat for a while on the ground next to the stone. He talked to her a little, the way people do when they are not sure anyone is listening, but the talking is not really about being heard. He told her about the trip, some of it. He told her about the hollow in the creek and the way the tent fabric had gone from black to gray as the night came apart. He did not tell her about the voice. He thought she probably knew. He drove home on the highway, not through the mountains, not near the county road, not anywhere close to that crossroads station. Just the interstate, 4 lanes, rest stops with vending machines and fluorescent lights, ordinary and anonymous and completely without atmosphere. He had the radio on. He was fine. Somewhere around the 2-hour mark, on a straight stretch of highway with nothing on either side but flat farmland and distant tree lines, he heard it. Not from outside, from the passenger seat, from the air in the car, from the specific frequency that a voice uses when it is very close. The way she said his name, the full name folding directly into the nickname without a seam. The way she had said it for 30 years. The way she said it 10,000 times. The way that the voice in the woods had almost gotten right, but had not. Because the version in the woods had a seam in it. A half-beat gap where there should have been none. This version had no gap. This version was exact. He pulled over on the highway shoulder. He put the hazard lights on. He sat for 3 minutes with his hands in his lap and the radio still playing, and the farmland flat and gray on both sides. He did not cry. He sat and he breathed and he waited for whatever was going to happen next. Nothing happened next. The radio played. A truck went by in the left lane. The hazard lights clicked in their slow rhythm. After 3 minutes, he pulled back onto the highway and drove home. He has never been able to decide if that was grief. The therapist would say yes. The timing, the location, the emotional weight of the day. All of it was consistent with a bereavement hallucination finally arriving in the form he had been expecting and dreading since April. That is a complete explanation. It fits. He can hold it up to what he knows about how the brain works under sustained loss, and it holds together. But the version in the woods had gotten the rhythm wrong. Whatever had been outside his tent, whatever had learned his name and practiced it from the tree line to the tent door, had never gotten the seam right. It had always put a gap where there should not be one. It had gotten close. Closer each time, but it had never gotten exact. The voice on the highway was exact. He has not decided which answer would be worse. He has not decided whether the voice on the highway was his grief finally resolving itself in the only form it knew how to take, or whether it was something else, something that had learned from the mountain and learned from the alley and had finally, after a year of practice, gotten the timing right. He has not decided. He does not think he will. He still drives through Appalachia sometimes when work requires it. He takes the highway. Before the last stretch, before the mountains come up on the horizon, and the road starts to climb and the tree line closes in on both sides, he turns off the radio. He does not know exactly when he started doing that. It is just something he does now. Something the mountain left in him. One of the small rules that became a habit that became the kind of thing you do without thinking. He turns off the radio. He drives through in silence. And when the mountains are behind him and the highway opens up again into the flat country on the other side, he turns it back on. He has never been able to explain, if someone asked, why he feels like that matters. He just knows that it does. The next account was submitted anonymously through a regional outdoor forum by a retired ranger who spent 22 years working a district in the central Appalachian range. He submitted it, he wrote, not because he expected anyone to believe it, but because he described himself as not a person who believes in things he cannot put a measurement to, and this had bothered him for that reason specifically. The details have been changed where necessary. The pattern has not been changed because the pattern is the point. The trail was officially closed following an unresolved disappearance. He knew that. He was the one who filed the closure. What he did not know, until 6 months later, was that the trail had apparently not gotten the memo. The ranger's name in this account is Dale. That is not his real name. He worked the same district for 22 years, which in ranger terms is long enough to know every trail junction, every seasonal creek crossing, every spot where the soil goes soft after rain and a poorly placed boot can send you down a slope faster than you planned. He was methodical in the way that people become methodical when their job requires them to make good decisions in bad conditions. He did not embellish. He did not dramatize. When something went wrong in his district, he filed a report that said what happened and what he did about it and what the outcome was, and he used plain language, and he was known for that. In the spring of a recent year, a solo hiker went missing on a backcountry trail in Dale's district. The hiker was experienced, properly equipped, had registered at the trailhead kiosk and listed his intended route and return date. When he did not check out by the return date, a search was initiated. Standard protocol, multi-day grid search, dog teams, aerial support when the weather permitted. The trail and its surrounding terrain were covered thoroughly. No body was found, no gear, no indication of what had happened, no disturbance of the soil at the creek gorge below the second bend, no broken vegetation on the steep sections, no blood, no boot prints leading off the established trail. Nothing that the search teams could point to and say, "Here, this is where it happened. This is what went wrong." The trail was closed pending investigation. Dale filed the closure paperwork himself. He posted the signs at the trailhead and locked the gate across the fire road access and marked the trail status in the district log as restricted pending investigation, which meant no recreational use, no through traffic, ranger check only with supervisor notification. Standard procedure for an open missing persons case on a managed trail. 6 months passed. Dale was at the ranger station on a Tuesday afternoon in late autumn, doing what he spent a significant portion of his working life doing, filling out end-of-shift reports with bad coffee going cold beside the keyboard. The station had 2 other rangers in it, both at desks in the outer room, both doing their own version of the same thing. The radio on the wall behind Dale's desk was set to the administrative channel, the one field rangers used for non-emergency coordination, the kind of traffic that was mostly logistics and weather updates and the occasional equipment question. A transmission came through. Dale heard it clearly. The other 2 rangers heard something. They both looked up, which he noted, but neither of them could confirm later exactly what the transmission said. Dale heard it clearly because he was closest to the radio, and because 22 years of listening to radio traffic had trained his ear to pull signal out of static in a way that most people's ears did not. The transmission reported a hiker in distress on the closed trail. It gave a location, a specific landmark name, one of the internal designations that district staff used for navigation and reporting, a name that appeared in district documents and on no public map or signage anywhere. It asked for confirmation of response. The unit ID attached to the transmission was a 7-digit code that Dale recognized because he had processed its retirement paperwork himself 3 years earlier. The unit had been physically destroyed, logged as damaged beyond repair, documented in the equipment disposal record, removed from the active registry. He had signed the disposal form. He remembered it because the unit had been his own field radio for the first 6 years of his career before it was reassigned, and there was a small particular feeling in signing off on something like that, like closing a chapter. He logged the transmission time. He went to the equipment log and cross-referenced the unit ID. It took him 20 minutes and 3 separate record books to confirm what he already knew. The unit did not exist anymore. It had not existed for 3 years. He tried to raise the caller on the same channel. Clean frequency, no response. He tried twice more and got nothing. He sat with the logbooks open in front of him, and he thought through the explanations. Equipment malfunction producing a ghost signal was theoretically possible but extremely unlikely on the administrative channel, which had specific frequency protections for exactly that reason. Interference from another district's traffic sometimes produced garbled transmissions, but not coherent ones with specific location data. A prank required someone with access to the channel frequency and the unit ID, both of which were internal information. A clerical error in the registry would not produce a real transmission on a live channel. He could dismiss the mechanism. He could not dismiss the location. The landmark name given in the transmission was in internal documents. It was not on any public trail map. It was not on any signage the public could access. Longtime locals who had hiked the trail for years sometimes used that name informally, which meant it was not completely impossible for a civilian to know it. But it was not common knowledge. It was the kind of detail that required familiarity with the district's internal geography, and the number of people who had that familiarity was small. He drove to the trailhead that afternoon. Late autumn light, low and flat, the kind of light that makes everything look slightly less three-dimensional than it actually is. The closure signs were intact. The gate across the fire road was locked with the same padlock he had put on it 6 months before. The small pull-off area at the trailhead was empty. No vehicles, no recent tire marks in the soft gravel beyond what rain and wind had left. He unlocked the gate and walked the first quarter-mile of the trail. Not going far, just enough to see around the first bend and confirm the trail was clear. The surface showed no recent foot traffic beyond what time and weather had done to it. The leaf litter was undisturbed in the specific way that undisturbed leaf litter looks, which is different from disturbed leaf litter that has been carefully replaced. He knew the difference, and this was the real thing. Months of settling and decomposing without interruption. At the first bend, the trail register box. Standard issue, the green metal kind that every managed trail in the district had at regular intervals, bolted to a post at roughly chest height. Dale had installed this one himself 8 years ago. He opened it out of habit. The register inside had entries up to the day the trail was closed, then blank pages. The entries stopped cleanly, the way they always stopped when a trail went dark. Not because people forgot to sign in, but because no one was coming. He paged through the blank pages. Near the back of the register, on a page that would have been roughly 8 pages past the last legitimate entry, there was a new entry. A date from 4 days earlier. A time, mid-morning, and the landmark name from the radio call, written as an arrival notation, the way hikers logged reaching a specific point on a route. The handwriting was in blue ballpoint pen. Small, neat, slightly right-leaning. He looked at it for a long time. Then he went back through the register from the beginning and compared it to every previous entry. It matched one. From 8 months before the disappearance. From a hiker who had registered on the trail and noted the same landmark in the same neat right-leaning blue ballpoint. The same hiker who had gone missing in the spring. The same hiker whose name was on the open case file on Dale's desk back at the station. He photographed the register entry. He locked the gate behind him and drove back to the station. He sat in the parking lot for a few minutes before going inside. He filed a report that evening. He wrote it the way he wrote all his reports. Plainly, with the facts in order, without interpretation where interpretation was not warranted. He noted the anomalous radio transmission, the unit ID, the landmark name. He noted the register entry, the date, the handwriting comparison. He noted that the handwriting appeared consistent with the previous entry made by the missing hiker. His supervisor read the report. Twice, based on the timestamps on the document system. He said nothing to Dale about it directly. He forwarded it to the investigation team handling the missing hiker's case. The trail stayed closed. Dale went home that night and heated up whatever was in the refrigerator and sat at his kitchen table and drank a beer and thought about the transmission. He thought about the landmark name. He thought about the register entry and the handwriting and the date, 4 days ago, on a trail that had been locked and signed and officially closed for 6 months. He thought about the fact that he had been the one who filed the closure. He thought about the fact that the transmission had used a unit ID attached to a radio he had personally signed off on for disposal. He thought about that for a while. Then he finished his beer and went to bed because there was nothing else to do, and he had an early shift the next morning. And 22 years of the job had taught him that the things you cannot explain do not get more explainable for being stared at. You file the report, you note the facts, you go to bed. You come back in the morning and you do the work that is in front of you. That was usually enough. This time it was not. The handwriting matched a missing person. That was the finding. Dale wrote it in his report exactly that way. His supervisor read it twice and said nothing. The trail stayed closed, and 3 weeks later, Dale went back. He told himself it was professional curiosity. He had been on this trail more times than he could count in 22 years, knew every junction and every seasonal quirk of it, and the anomaly in the register was something he had documented and submitted, and that should have been enough. It was enough. He had done his part. The investigation team had the photograph and the finding, and whatever they chose to do with it was their domain, not his. He was not an investigator. He was a field ranger. His job was the trail and the land and the people who came into his district, and the investigation was someone else's jurisdiction, and he knew that, and he respected it. But the landmark name would not leave him alone. The internal designation for that point on the trail was something Dale himself had coined, or had picked up from the ranger who trained him. He could not remember which anymore. It had been that long. It was not official. It did not appear in any public document. It appeared in internal reports and in the district's working files and in the verbal shorthand that rangers used with each other, the way any workplace develops its own language for the things it deals with every day. The number of people outside the district staff who would know that name was very small. Longtime trail crew volunteers, maybe. A few of the search and rescue team members who had worked with the district long enough to absorb the internal geography. The missing hiker, apparently, and whoever had made the radio call. He went back on a day off. Personal truck, plain clothes, no district markings. He told himself he was going for a walk on a trail he knew well, which was technically true. He did not log his location with the district because he was not on shift, which was technically within his rights. He drove to the trailhead, unlocked the gate with his district key, relocked it behind him, and walked the trail for the first time since the closure. The day was gray and overcast. The sky the flat white that precedes rain in the mountains without committing to it. The forest had the look of late autumn, fully settled. Bare hardwoods, the understory open and visible in a way it was not in summer. The ground covered in a thick layer of wet leaves that had been down long enough to start losing their color. He had walked this trail in every season, and this was his least favorite version of it. Too visible, too open. The summer canopy gave the trail a contained quality that the bare winter trees did not, and without it, the forest felt larger and colder and harder to read. He went at a measured pace. He was not looking for anything specific. He was looking at the trail the way he always looked at trails, for what was there and what was not, for signs of use and signs of damage and signs of anything that should not be. An experienced trail ranger reads a path the way an experienced reader reads a page, quickly and with comprehension, picking up meaning from details that pass unnoticed to untrained eyes. The first 2 miles showed him nothing unusual. Leaf litter undisturbed. No recent foot traffic. Trail surface intact through the sections that were prone to erosion, which told him the recent rains had not been heavy enough to cause damage. He passed the first trail register box, different from the one at the first bend, this one at the 1 mile marker, and checked it. Blank pages since the closure date. Normal. At the 2 mile marker, the trail narrowed where it ran along the edge of a steep slope before turning inland again. The drop on the left side was significant here, 60 or 70 feet down to the creek gorge below, and the trail surface was always slightly treacherous after rain because of the way the slope shed water across the path. He slowed and watched his footing. On the right side of the trail, at chest height, hanging from a branch by its lanyard, an orange whistle. He stopped. It was a specific type. A Fox 40 Peeless, the kind that serious hikers and outdoors people carried because it worked even when wet, could not freeze, and had a range that exceeded most other whistles in its size class. Orange, with a lanyard that was green paracord tied off in a knot that he recognized specifically because he had seen it in a photograph. In the missing hiker's registration photo, the one taken at the trailhead kiosk on the day he had begun his hike, there had been a whistle visible, clipped to the left shoulder strap of his pack. The same type, the same color, with a green paracord lanyard tied in what appeared to be the same distinctive knot. Dale had studied that registration photo many times during the search. He had studied it the way you study the last known image of someone you are looking for, committing the details to memory in case one of them becomes relevant. The whistle had been one of those details. He did not touch it immediately. He stood and looked at it. It was clean. No weathering, no rust on the metal body, no degradation of the paracord. It had not been hanging here through autumn rain and temperature cycling. It looked like it had been placed recently, within days, possibly within hours. It was hung from the branch on the right side of the trail, at chest height, facing the path, oriented so that someone walking in the direction Dale was walking would see it directly in front of them, not hanging at a random angle from a random branch. Placed, deliberately and carefully placed for someone walking this specific direction on this specific trail to find. He took his phone out and photographed it. Then he took it down and put it in his jacket pocket. It was evidence. Evidence had a place in the system. He would submit it through proper channels and let the system do what it did with evidence, which was process it and log it and file it and occasionally act on it. He continued to the end of the trail and turned back. On the return, coming back through the trailhead, he found the man at the gate. The gate was still locked. Dale had the only key for this end of the trail, and it was in his pocket, and the gate was locked. But standing outside the gate on the public side was an older man in a heavy hunting coat, the kind with the blaze orange panel across the shoulders and the canvas exterior that was stiff with cold. He was not a hiker. His boots were work boots, not trail boots. He had a truck parked in the pull-off area outside the closure boundary, a dark-colored extended cab, and he appeared to have been standing at the gate for some time. He looked at Dale when Dale came through and relocked the gate. "You're the ranger, aren't you?" Not a question. The same flat declarative that people who have lived in a place long enough to know its personnel use when they are not guessing. Dale said yes. The man looked past him at the trail. "Did you go past the second bend?" Dale said he had walked the full trail. The man nodded slowly. Something in the nod suggested that this was not surprising to him, and also that he had a view on it that he was deciding whether to share. "You find something?" Dale did not confirm. Standard practice. You do not share case details with unidentified civilians regardless of how reasonable they seem. The man was quiet for a moment. Then, "People find things on that trail. That's not the problem. The problem is what finds them back." He paused. "You should stop going up there alone." Dale asked the man's name. The man had already turned toward his truck. He got in without answering. The truck had no front plate. By the time Dale had his notebook out, the truck was already pulling onto the access road and he did not get the rear plate either. He sat in his own truck for a long time before driving out. He had the whistle in his jacket pocket. He had the photograph of the register entry on his phone. He had a conversation with a man who knew he was a ranger and knew he had gone past the second bend and knew that people found things on that trail and had chosen to tell him that finding things was not the part he should be worried about. What he did not have was a single rational explanation that covered all three things at once. Each one, separately, had a rational explanation. Together, they did not. He drove back to his station. He wrote up what he had found. He submitted the whistle through proper channels. He did not stop thinking about what the man had said. The problem is what finds them back. He had been going up there alone. He submitted the whistle to the investigation team. They logged it. 2 months later, he asked for an update. They told him it was logged. He asked what that meant. They said it meant it was logged. That was the last time he asked. The whistle was confirmed as consistent with the missing hiker's gear description. That was the language in the supplemental report. Consistent with, not identical to, not confirmed as belonging to. Consistent with. It was the language of evidence that could not be definitively traced, of proof that pointed without arriving. The investigation team noted it, and the trail stayed closed and the case remained open, and Dale went back to his end-of-shift reports and his bad coffee and the ordinary work of managing a district in the Appalachian backcountry, which was mostly weather and erosion, and the occasional lost day hiker who had underestimated the terrain. He submitted a description of the man at the gate in his supplemental report. Age range, physical description, truck color and model year approximation, hunting coat with blaze orange panel. The investigation team passed it to the county sheriff's office, who ran it against local registrations and came back with nothing that matched. No one fitting that description lived in the immediate area. The truck description matched nothing registered locally. The man had not been seen at the trailhead by any other district personnel. He appeared in Dale's report and nowhere else, and then he was gone, the way certain people are gone when you try to find them on paper. Dale filed all of it and went back to work, but he had started doing something he had never done in 22 years of ranging. He had started going through old logs. He had access to the district's paper archives going back to the founding of the management area, which predated digital record-keeping by several decades. The archives were kept in a back room of the district office, in filing cabinets that were opened infrequently enough that the drawer runners had developed a particular resistance from disuse. He had been in that room maybe a dozen times in his career, usually looking for historical trail survey data or old infrastructure records. He knew the system well enough to navigate it. He pulled the trail logs going back 15 years and started reading. It took him 3 evenings after shift, sitting in the back room with a desk lamp and his reading glasses and a legal pad for notes. He was not sure what he was looking for exactly. He was looking for pattern. He was looking for anything that matched the shape of what had happened. Anomalous radio call, register entry, found object on the trail. He read through 15 years of routine maintenance reports and weather damage assessments and visitor incident forms, and mostly he found exactly what those things sound like, which is dry and procedural and entirely uneventful. In a log from 11 years earlier, he found it. A report filed by a ranger who was no longer with the district, transferred out the spring following the report, which Dale noted without yet understanding why that detail would matter. The report documented an anomalous radio transmission received on the administrative channel. The transmission had reported a hiker in distress on the same trail. It had given a location using an internal landmark designation. The unit ID attached to the transmission had been, at the time of the call, not in active service. It had been pulled from rotation 6 months earlier, following a receiver malfunction, was awaiting parts for repair, and was sitting in the equipment room at the station. The responding ranger had driven to the trailhead and walked the trail. No hiker, no sign of recent use. Trail clear. Dale sat with that report for a long time. He pulled the trail register logs from that same period. It took another evening because the older records were less organized, the register sheets filed by date rather than by trail, and the trail in question had a longer name in the older documentation before the district had simplified its filing system. He found the right binder eventually and went through it page by page. There it was. An entry dated 2 days after the anomalous radio call, timed mid-morning. The same internal landmark. Different handwriting from the current case, this one printed in block capitals rather than the neat right-leaning cursive of the recent entry. He cross-referenced the date against the visitor registration records from that period. One registered visitor on the trail in the week surrounding that date. A solo hiker who had signed in, noted his intended route, and listed a return date he had not made. The case had been eventually closed. Accidental fall, presumed, into the creek gorge below the second bend. The creek gorge that had never surrendered a body. Dale knew that case. It was before his tenure in the district, but the file was in the archives because it had never been formally closed with a recovery, just administratively closed with a presumption, which was not the same thing. He compared the block capital handwriting in the register to the hiker's original registration form. It matched. 2 disappearances, 11 years apart, same trail, same pattern, down to the details. Anomalous radio call from a unit not in active service, internal landmark used that the caller should not have known. Register entry in the missing hiker's handwriting appearing on the trail after the disappearance, a found object placed along the trail facing inward. Dale sat in the back room of the district office with the desk lamp humming, and the filing cabinet drawer open beside him, and the legal pad covered in notes. And he understood 2 things simultaneously. The first was that he had documented a pattern that the institution he worked for had not connected, either because no one had looked across 11 years of archives or because no one had wanted to. The second was that he was going to have to go back to the trail. He did not go back immediately. He sat with what he had found for a week. He organized his notes. He put together a supplemental submission that laid out the 11-year parallel as clearly and plainly as he could. Trail designation, case numbers, radio call logs, register entries, found objects, dates. He submitted it to his supervisor and to the investigation team simultaneously. He did not editorialize. He stated the facts and let the facts make the argument. His supervisor acknowledged receipt. The investigation team acknowledged receipt. Neither of them initiated a review of the 11-year-old case. The pattern was noted. It was filed. Dale put in for a personal day and told a colleague named Reyes where he was going. He told Reyes because Reyes was the kind of person who would actually act on information rather than file it, and because the man at the gate had told him he should stop going up there alone, and because Dale had decided to go back but had also decided not to be foolish about it. Reyes thought he was being strange. He noted Dale's location anyway because Reyes was also a 22-year ranger and understood that strange requests for location confirmation were sometimes the requests that mattered. Dale drove to the trailhead at midday. He unlocked the gate and walked the full trail in good light, going past the second bend for the first time, continuing to the section of trail that ran along the gorge overlook. He had walked this trail hundreds of times and had never had a reason to feel anything particular about it. It was a well-designed trail on difficult terrain, moderate difficulty, maintained to district standards. It had a tendency to hold water on the lower switchbacks after heavy rain, and the gorge overlook section had a loose surface that required attention. Those were its characteristics. That was all it had ever been. The overlook was a flat section of trail about 30 feet wide, where the path pulled back from the slope and ran level along the top of the gorge wall. The gorge dropped maybe 80 feet to the creek below, the walls steep enough that Dale had always noted it as a hazard in his maintenance reports. The view was significant. You could see 3 ridges from the overlook on a clear day, and it was the kind of place hikers stopped to eat lunch and take photographs. The soil along the edge was soft, the kind that held impressions well. He came around the last turn before the overlook and stopped. There was a figure standing at the edge, in hiking gear, standing completely still, looking down into the gorge. From Dale's position at the turn, the distance to the figure was roughly 40 yards. He could see the pack on the figure's back, the hiking pants, the hat pulled low. The figure was not moving. It was standing at the very edge of the overlook, toes at the lip, looking straight down into the creek below. He called out, "Standard protocol. Identify yourself, establish contact, assess the situation." The figure did not respond. He called again, louder. The figure turned its head. Just the head, not the body. The head turned slowly to the left, toward Dale, while the body remained facing the gorge. 40 yards was close enough to see the turn, but too far to see the face clearly, and the hat brim put the upper face in shadow even in the flat midday light. The figure looked at him. He could not see the eyes. He could not resolve the features. He could see the angle of the face and the fact that it was directed at him. He reached for his radio. He was going to call Reyes. He was going to say there was a person at the gorge overlook, and he needed a second unit at the trailhead, and he needed it now. He looked down at the radio for the 2 seconds it took to key the right channel. When he looked back up, the overlook was empty. 40 yards, 2 seconds. Flat, open ground with the gorge on one side and a steep slope on the other, and a single trail leading in both directions. There was nowhere to go that a person could have reached in 2 seconds. Not down the gorge face, which was a near vertical drop. Not back along the trail, which he had a clear sightline to for 100 yards in both directions. Not up the slope, which was too steep to move on quickly and too open for concealment. The overlook was empty. He walked the 40 yards to the edge and checked the soil. The soft earth along the lip of the gorge, the kind that held impressions well, the kind he always checked for hazard assessment. It was undisturbed. No boot prints. No compression marks where someone had been standing. The soil was smooth with the pattern of settled leaves and light rain, unmarked. He stood at the gorge overlook for a while. He looked down into the creek below, which was running shallow and clear over flat rock, visible from here, not concealing anything on its surface. He called Reyes. He said he was coming out. He did not explain more than that on the radio. He filed one more report that evening. He described the figure. He described the location. He described the absence of footprints on soil that would have recorded them. He described the head turning without the body. He used plain language, and he did not interpret. He stated the facts. His supervisor signed off on the report without comment. Dale put in for a district transfer the following spring. He transferred to a district 300 miles away. He told people it was for personal reasons. He never used the old trail name again. Not in conversation, not in reports, not in anything written. He would not say the trail's name aloud. He never explained why. The transfer was approved without difficulty. 22 years in one district is a long tenure, and a lateral transfer to a comparable position in a different part of the range was not unusual for a ranger at his career stage. It read as professional refreshment, a desire for new terrain, the kind of move that organizations understand without requiring explanation. His supervisor signed the paperwork. His colleagues gave him a small send-off at the station, coffee and a sheet cake from the grocery store in the nearest town, and a card that most of them signed. Reyes shook his hand at the door and held it a beat longer than a handshake required and said, "Take care of yourself," which was all either of them said about any of it. He drove to his new district in the northern part of the range on a Monday in early April. New station, new colleagues, new terrain, ridges that ran differently than the ones he knew, creek systems that drained in different directions, trail infrastructure built by different crews with different habits. He spent the first month learning the land the way you learn any new assignment, methodically and without shortcuts, walking every trail in the district on his own time before he had to manage them professionally. The work was the same work. The mountains were different mountains. That helped. He did not hike alone. That was the clearest change in his professional practice, the one his new colleagues noticed first. Rangers in backcountry districts spend a significant portion of their field time alone by necessity. Solo trail checks, solo infrastructure assessments, solo response to non-emergency calls. It is part of the job. Dale had done it for 22 years without a second thought. Now he arranged to go out with a partner whenever he could, logged his solo routes in more detail than protocol required, and established a check-in schedule with the station that was tighter than anything his new district had previously used. His colleagues adapted to it. Nobody complained. If they found it unusual, they did not say so, because rangers generally do not ask each other why a safety protocol has become more stringent. They assume the answer is experience. He answered all radio calls. He had not become someone who flinched at the radio. But there was a pause now before he acknowledged transmissions from unknown unit IDs. A brief moment in which he checked the ID against his mental registry of active units before responding. It was a fraction of a second. It was not something anyone else would notice. He noticed it every time because it had not been there before, and it was there now, and he understood that it was not going to go away. He did not use the old trail name. This was the thing his new colleagues eventually noticed, or the closest thing to it. Trail rangers talk about trails the way anyone talks about their working geography, constantly and specifically, and when Dale's district history came up in conversation, which it did, because 22 years in one place generates a lot of professional history. He talked about it in terms of landmarks and watershed boundaries and maintenance challenges without ever using the specific trail name. If someone mentioned a trail in his old district by name, he would acknowledge it without repeating it. If a report or a map required him to reference the trail, he used the trail number from the district catalog rather than the name. His new colleagues noticed the pattern without understanding it. He deflected when asked about it, smoothly and without apparent discomfort, and people generally did not push. He did not explain. He was not going to explain. The explanation required things that could not be stated in a professional context without consequences he did not want, and in a personal context required a length and a specificity that he had not been able to bring himself to deliver to anyone who knew him. So, he kept it. He carried it the way you carry something heavy that you have decided you are not going to put down, not because you enjoy carrying it, but because putting it down in the wrong place creates a different problem. The investigation into the recent disappearance remained open as of the date he submitted this account. He had checked. The trail had not been reopened. The case file was still active, which meant someone was still technically responsible for it. Though what active looked like in practice for a case with no new evidence and no recovery was something Dale understood from his own professional experience, and it was not the same as being worked. The 11-year-old case remained closed. His supplemental submission documenting the parallel had been received and filed and had not initiated a review. He did not know whether this was because the review had been conducted internally and found insufficient grounds for reopening, or because the submission had been read and set aside, or because no one had read it carefully enough to understand what he was saying. He did not follow up after the second acknowledgement. There was nothing to follow up with. The pattern was documented. The institution had the documentation. What the institution chose to do with it was not his jurisdiction, and had not been since the transfer paperwork was signed. The man at the gate was never identified. Dale had included a full description in his report. Age range, physical build, the hunting coat with the blaze orange panel, the dark extended cab truck, the direction of travel on the access road. The sheriff's office had run it. County records showed no one matching the description in the immediate area. The truck matched nothing locally registered. Dale had noted in his report that the man had known he was a ranger and had known he had gone past the second bend, both of which required either prior knowledge of his identity or an assumption based on the district truck he had been driving. Except he had not been driving the district truck that day. He had been in his personal vehicle, plain clothes, off the clock. He had noted this discrepancy in the report. The report had been filed. He had been driving his personal truck, unmarked, in civilian clothing, and the man at the gate had said, "You're the ranger," without hesitation, as if the identification were obvious. Dale did not know how to account for that. He had included it in the report because it was a fact. It had not generated a follow-up question. The radio call log from the original transmission had been submitted to District Equipment Management. They had confirmed the unit ID was retired and physically destroyed, consistent with the disposal records, and they had offered no further explanation for how a destroyed unit could have transmitted on a live channel. Equipment Management did not have a category for that explanation. They had confirmed the documentation and closed the inquiry. The submission of this account, he wrote at the end of it, was not something he expected to resolve anything. He was not looking for resolution. He was not looking for someone to tell him what the figure at the gorge had been, or what had made the radio call, or how a missing hiker's handwriting had appeared in a trail register on a locked and signed trail 6 months after the hiker's disappearance. He had spent a career operating in a world where things had explanations, and the explanations were findable if you looked carefully enough and used the right methods. He still believed that was true for most things. He submitted the account because the pattern was real. He had documented it. He had the reports, the photographs, the supplemental submissions, the archive logs with the 11-year parallel. The pattern existed in the record. Whether anyone chose to look at the record was not something he could control. He closed with one thing that was not in any of his official reports. Months after the transfer, he had received a message through the outdoor forum where a shortened version of his account had been shared by someone who had read his initial submission. An anonymous user, no posting history, account created the same day the message was sent. The message contained one question. It asked whether the figure at the gorge overlook had been wearing the right boot on the wrong foot. Dale had not answered the message. He had never said publicly whether he could tell from 40 yards in flat midday light with the hat brim shading the face whether the figure's footwear was correctly matched. He had noted the hiking gear in his report. He had noted the pack and the hat and the pants. He had not noted the boots specifically, because at 40 yards the boots were not the detail his eye had gone to first. What his eye had gone to first was the face, when the head turned without the body. What he had seen in the half-second before he looked down at the radio. What had been visible at 40 yards in the shadow of the hat brim. He had never said what he saw. He closed the forum account the day after the message arrived. The account had been open for 11 days. Whether the figure at the gorge had the right boot on the wrong foot was a question Dale did not answer. It was a question that required knowing something about the figure that Dale was not prepared to confirm or deny, because confirming or denying it meant saying plainly what he believed he had seen at the overlook, and saying that plainly was something he had decided he was not going to do. He works his new district. He knows the trails now, after 2 years, the way he knows all trails, their moods and their hazards, and the way they change with the season. He is good at his job. He will be good at his job until he retires, which he plans to do in 4 years, and then he will be done with trails, and registers and radio calls and all of it. He does not use the old trail name. His colleagues have stopped asking about it. When a transmission comes in on the administrative channel from a unit ID he does not immediately recognize, he pauses. Just a fraction of a second. just long enough to check. He has not yet heard the ID he is listening for. He does not think about what it will mean if he does. The next account is different from the ones before it. It does not come from a single night or a single encounter. It comes from a family. It has been carried by that family for 30 years, passed from one person to the next the way certain things are passed in mountain communities, not written down, not explained, just said when it needs to be said and left alone when it does not. A woman submitted it recently because she found the location on a map, and it was exactly where her family had always described it. She has changed the names. She has not changed what happened. In her family, the rule was simple. You do not stop at the crossing on Millard Creek Road after dark. Nobody explained why, nobody had to. And then her uncle stopped there once. And that was explanation enough. She tells it the way it was told to her, which is the only honest way to tell a story that belongs to someone else. Her uncle's name in this account is Harlan. He was in his late 30s at the time, which puts the event roughly 30 years back, in the kind of late November that the southern Appalachian counties get when autumn has fully given up and winter has not yet committed. Cold nights, gray days, the smell of wood smoke from every house you pass on the back roads, deer season in its final weeks and everyone who hunts making use of the last of it. Harlan was a practical man. That is the first thing she says about him. And she says it the way people say it about someone when they want you to understand that what follows is not the kind of story that practical man tells. He hunted, he farmed a small piece of family land, he fixed his own equipment and his neighbor's equipment, and did not charge for it. And he had enough experience in the woods and on the back roads of that county to know the difference between things that were alarming and things that were not. He was not a person who spooked. His wife would tell you the same thing. His children would tell you the same thing. Everyone who knew him would tell you the same thing, which is part of why the story carried the weight it did when he finally told it. It was a late November evening, after 9, full dark. He was driving home from a day on family land, deer hunting, a good day, a field-dressed 8-point in the truck bed that he was already mentally processing, thinking about the cooler at home, the cuts, how long the meat would keep at the temperatures they were getting. The truck was warm. The radio was on a country station out of the nearest city, the signal fading in and out the way signals do on mountain roads, losing itself in the ridges and coming back between them. He had a thermos of coffee from that morning on the seat beside him, cold by now, the lid loose the way thermos lids get when you have opened and closed them too many times. The heater ran hot, so he had the window cracked a half-inch despite the cold, the outside air keeping the cab from going stifling. Millard Creek Road was his shortcut home. It had always been his shortcut home. A narrow county road, unpaved in the sections nearest the creek, running through a shallow hollow between two ridges and crossing the creek itself on a one-lane bridge about halfway along. The bridge was old and narrow, the kind that required you to slow to a near stop and ease across and hope nobody was coming the other direction. But the road saved him 20 minutes over the paved alternative, and he had driven it so many times the truck found it without him thinking about it. The family rule about the crossing was something he had grown up with. His grandmother had said it first, or at least she was the first person he remembered saying it. You do not stop at the crossing on Millard Creek Road after dark. Not, do not stop and look around, not be careful at the crossing, not watch your speed on the bridge. Just, you do not stop there after dark. He had followed it his whole life without thinking much about it, the way you follow the rules that come from people you trust before you are old enough to evaluate them. You do not run in the house. You do not leave food out for the animals. You do not stop at the crossing on Millard Creek Road after dark. Rules like furniture. You work around them without asking who put them there. The bridge came up in his headlights the way it always did, the the wooden planking visible first, and then the low metal rails on either side, and then the darkness of the creek below. He slowed. He always slowed here, always eased onto the bridge with care, the planking making the particular hollow sound it made under the truck tires. Slightly different from asphalt, slightly different from gravel, its own sound. He had crossed this bridge more times than he could count. The truck stalled on the bridge, not gradually, not with warning. It just stopped, the way an engine stops when someone turns the key, all at once and completely, the radio cutting out with it, the heater fan dying, leaving the truck sitting in the middle of the bridge in sudden silence with only the headlights still running on the battery. He tried the key. Nothing. Tried again. Nothing. He sat for a moment and thought through it. Not an old truck, not one with known electrical problems. The fuel gauge showing a quarter tank, which was enough, and tried again. Nothing. Tried a fourth time. On the fourth try it caught. Rough at first, the engine running uneven for a few seconds the way an engine runs when it has been startled back into operation, and then smoothing out. The radio coming back mid-song. The heater fan picking up again. He sat with the engine running and his hands on the wheel, and the headlights showing him the far bank of the creek and the road continuing on the other side. 30 seconds, maybe. He had been sitting on the bridge for 30 seconds with a dead engine in the dark, and now the engine was running again, and the reasonable thing to do was to pull off the bridge and continue home. He was about to do that. Then the headlights showed him what was on the far bank, a figure crouching at the water's edge below the bridge approach, at the point where the creek bank dropped to the water, facing away from him, facing the creek, completely still, in the way that things are still when they have been still for a long time, and stillness is their natural condition rather than a temporary posture. He could not see it clearly from the bridge. The headlights were at the wrong angle for the bank below, illuminating the road and the near edge of the bank, but not the water itself. But the shape was there, crouching, human in its proportions, not moving. He thought, someone fishing. Unusual for November at night, but fishermen kept their own hours. He thought, someone who had broken down on the road and come to the creek for water. Impractical, but not impossible. He thought, a deer, bedded at the water's edge, reading as human in the headlight geometry the way large animals sometimes did. The brain finds the shape it expects, and at night, from a moving or stopped vehicle, a deer in a certain position could resolve into something else. He pulled off the bridge and stopped on the far bank approach, the figure now to his left at a distance of maybe 20 feet, still crouching, still facing the creek. He rolled the window down, not all the way, halfway, and called out. Asked if someone was there, asked if they needed help, the ordinary things you call out when you see a person alone by a road at night. The figure stood up. It stood up slowly, unfolding from the crouch in a way that took longer than standing up should take, as if the joints were working through a sequence they had to think about. And it was tall. When it reached its full height, it was taller than the bank angle should have allowed for a person rising from a crouch at that position. Taller than the geometry worked out, taller than Harlan's eye expected based on the distance and the angle. The kind of tall that makes you recalculate the distance because the distance must be wrong. It turned slowly. Not fully, it turned toward the truck, orienting on the sound of his voice, but the headlights were behind him now, and the figure was between the light and the creek bank, and he could not see a face. He could see the shape of a head and the shape of shoulders and the height of it against the dark bank behind it. It took one step toward the truck. He put the truck in drive and he pulled forward, and he did not stop. He did not roll the window up first. He drove with the window halfway down, and the cold air coming in and the radio playing, and he did not stop until he was on the state highway, with the county road and the bridge and the creek and everything on it behind him, and the highway lights overhead and other vehicles visible in both directions. He drove home. He unloaded the deer from the truck bed almost automatically, the muscle memory of the process carrying him through it while his mind was somewhere else. His wife came to the door and looked at him the way she sometimes looked at him when something had happened that he had not told her yet. He did not tell her that night. He processed the deer and wrapped the meat and put it in the cooler and went to bed. He said the thing that stayed with him was not how it looked. It was how it moved when it stood up. He said it stood up the way something stands up when it has been crouching for a very long time and its body had forgotten how. He told his grandmother what happened. She did not ask what the figure looked like. She did not ask what it did. She asked him one question. Did it say anything before you left? He drove to her house the next morning. She lived 20 minutes from his place on the same side of the county, in a house that her husband had built and that she had occupied alone since his death a decade before. A small house on a gravel road with a garden that she kept going well past the age when most people gave gardens up. She was in her 80s by then, sharp in the way that certain older mountain women are sharp, not loud about it, not performing it, just precise in her thinking and economical in her speech and very difficult to fool. He had never been able to fool her about anything, and he had stopped trying somewhere around age 12. He sat at her kitchen table. She made coffee without asking if he wanted any, because she always made coffee when someone came to the table, and she sat across from him and waited. She did not prompt him. She had a way of waiting that was not passive. It was active waiting, the kind that created a space you felt obligated to fill, and he filled it. He told her what had happened on the bridge. Plainly, in the order it happened, without embellishment. The truck stalling, the figure on the bank, how it stood, the one step toward the truck, driving out. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment, and then she asked, "Did it say anything before you left?" He said no. It had not spoken. She nodded, not with relief exactly, more like confirmation of something she had been waiting to hear. "Then you did right," she said. "You left before it did." He asked what it was. She was quiet for a while. She looked at her coffee cup, not at him, in the way she looked away when she was deciding how much to say. Then, "There used to be a rule about that crossing. Your grandfather's father put it in place after something happened to a man who used to live near the bottom of that road. The man stopped there one night and he made it home, but he came back different. He came back quiet. He didn't last 2 winters after that." Harlan asked what had happened to the man. She shook her head, not refusing to answer, indicating that she did not know, or that the knowing of it was not the part that mattered. Nobody said exactly. People didn't say exactly about things like that. They just said, "Don't stop there after dark," and everybody understood that the reason was sufficient. He asked again what it was, the thing on the bank. She looked at him for a moment. "I don't know that it has a name anybody settled on," she said. "Not one that got written down anywhere I ever saw." She wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. "The rule is, don't stop at the crossing after dark. If the truck dies, don't get out. Don't roll the window all the way down. Don't answer if it speaks." She paused. "You didn't answer it." He said no. "Then you did right," she said again. And then, after a moment, "It doesn't chase. It waits. The ones that go back are the ones who have trouble." That was the shape of the warning as she gave it. Not an explanation, not a history. A set of practical instructions and a consequence for not following them, delivered the way you deliver information that has been tested and found reliable. she did not elaborate and he did not push, because the conversation had the quality that certain mountain conversations have, where the silence after the last thing said is part of the answer, and you understand that asking further is not going to get you further. He has never gone back to Millard Creek Road after dark, not once in 30 years. The strange part, the part that took 3 weeks to arrive, that he did not tell his grandmother about until later, that he has never fully explained to his own satisfaction, happened on family land. 3 weeks after the crossing, late afternoon, the last week of deer season. He was coming out from a stand on the far edge of the property, walking the boundary of an old logging road that ran along the base of the ridge before cutting back toward where he had parked. The logging road was on family land. It had always been on family land. He had walked it dozens of times in hunting season, knew every bend and every soft spot and every place the briars came in close to the track. The light was going. Not dark yet, but going. The late afternoon gray of a November sky with no sun visible. The trees bare enough that the sky showed through the canopy in pale patches. He was walking and thinking about nothing in particular. The easy, inward quiet of a person at the end of a day in the woods, when he heard his name called from the tree line to his left. Not his full name, the version of it his grandmother used, a shortening that she had used for him since he was a child, that his wife used occasionally, that his children had heard and sometimes used when they were being affectionate. A name that almost no one outside his immediate family used with any regularity. From the tree line, from the timber on the uphill side of the logging road, maybe 30 feet into the trees. His name in that version, called once, clearly, in a tone that was not urgent and not frightened. Conversational, almost, the way you call to someone you expect to answer. He did not stop. He did not answer. He walked faster without running, the way you move when you want to cover ground quickly without advertising that you are covering it quickly. And he made the truck in 8 minutes instead of the usual 15, and he got in and drove out to the county road and sat there for a moment with the engine running before he pulled onto the pavement. That night, he told his wife the full story. Both parts, the bridge and the logging road. It was the first time he had told her the bridge part in full. She listened the way she always listened, without interrupting, and when he finished, she asked him if he thought it had followed him. He said he did not know, but the logging road was on family land, and family land backed up to the same ridge system that ran above the Millard Creek Hollow. The same ridge, different face. If something lived in those woods, or used those woods, or moved through them for reasons he did not understand, the ridge was continuous. The hollow and the logging road were not separated by anything except distance and a ridgeline, and ridgelines are not walls. His wife did not tell him he was being foolish. She was not that kind of wife, and she knew him well enough to know that if Harlan was telling her this, there was something to tell. The niece who submitted this account, the woman who grew up with the story, who heard it told at the kitchen table, who knew the bridge and the road, and the grandmother's kitchen and the particular way Harlan went quiet when the subject came near. She is the one who found the location on a map. She had grown up knowing the name Millard Creek Road, the way you know the names of places that have weight in your family, without necessarily knowing exactly where they are. Then, one evening, she had a county map open for an unrelated reason, and she found it. The road, the bridge, exactly where the family had always described it. Exactly the right distance from the family land. Exactly the right relationship to the ridge system. She started looking into the county historical records not long after. Not because she expected to find anything, more because the researcher's instinct that some people have, the need to put a thing into context, to see if the thing that happened to Harlan fit into a larger shape. She went to the county library and asked about historical records for the Millard Creek area, and a librarian who had worked there long enough to know where everything was brought her 2 boxes and a roll of microfilm. In the microfilm, a local paper archive going back to the early part of the 20th century, she found a notice. Printed in the small practical language of the era, the kind of language that stated facts without dwelling on them. A man had been found in Millard Creek in winter, at the crossing, unresponsive. No cause of death was clearly recorded. The family of the deceased had placed a notice asking that people avoid stopping at the crossing, particularly after dark, as the location was considered dangerous. The man's surname was in the notice. She wrote it down. Then she went back to the box of county records and found the older documents from the same period. Property records, mostly. She was not sure what she was looking for until she found it. A property record for a parcel near the bottom of what was then called Millard Hollow Road, the older name for the road before the county standardized its naming system. The owner of the parcel in the early part of the century, the man who had lived at the bottom of that road, the man her grandmother had mentioned when she told Harlan the history of the rule, the man who had stopped at the crossing one night and made it home, but come back different, who had come back quiet, who had not lasted 2 winters. His surname was the same surname as the man found dead in the creek. She sat with that for a long time at the library table, with the microfilm reader humming beside her, and the county records spread out, and the librarian working quietly at the desk across the room. 2 men, the same surname. One who stopped at the crossing and came home, changed, and did not last 2 winters. One who was found in the creek at the crossing in winter with no clear cause. Whether they were related, whether the second man was the first man or a descendant, or someone else entirely who shared the name, the records did not say. The records said what they said and stopped there. She found the name in the county record. She found the notice in the microfilm archive at the county library. She has not shown any of it to Harlan. She is not sure she wants to. Harlan is in his late 60s now. He still hunts. He still drives the back roads of that county. He has never driven Millard Creek Road again. Not once in 30 years. He goes 20 minutes out of his way to avoid it. Every time. He does not explain the detour to passengers. That is the detail she mentions first when she describes how the story lives in the present tense. Not the bridge, not the figure, not the logging road, but the detour. 20 minutes, every time, without comment, without explanation, without acknowledging that he is doing it. If someone is in the truck with him and they are going somewhere that would logically route through Millard Creek Road, Harlan simply takes the other way. If someone asks about it, he changes the subject or says the road is rough, which is true, it has always been rough, and it is enough of an answer that most people accept it. His children grew up knowing the rule the same way he had grown up knowing it, by proximity and repetition and the understanding that certain things in their father's life did not require explanation. They knew you did not take Millard Creek Road after dark. They had absorbed it young enough that it became part of their internal geography, one of those family-specific navigational facts that you carry without examining. His daughter, now grown with children of her own, still routes around it. She told the niece once that she does not even think about it anymore. She just goes the other way. It is simply the way you go. The truck stalling on the bridge was never explained. Harlan had the engine looked at the following week, at the shop in town where he had taken his vehicles for 20 years, by a mechanic who knew that truck as well as Harlan did. The mechanic went through it. He found nothing. The electrical system was clean. The fuel system was clean. The battery tested at full capacity. There was no evidence of a fault that could have caused a complete and sudden stall on a cold night with a warm engine and sufficient fuel. The mechanic said sometimes they just do that, which is the honest answer a mechanic gives when the vehicle is healthy and the event should not have happened. Harlan paid him and drove home, and did not go back to Millard Creek Road. The figure was never reported. He had thought about it in the weeks after, whether there was a report to make and to whom. A figure crouching at a creek bank on a county road at 9 in the evening in November was not obviously a law enforcement matter. He had not seen a crime. He had not seen a clear threat. He had seen something he could not explain, and explaining it to a deputy, sitting across from someone in a uniform and saying, "I saw a figure at the Millard Creek crossing and it stood up wrong and it was too tall," was not something he could picture going anywhere useful. So he did not report it. He filed it the way his family had always filed things that belonged to that crossing, privately, without official record, in the category of things you knew and did not need to prove. The logging road incident was the same. A private matter, a family matter. He told his wife and he told his grandmother, and that was the full extent of his reporting. And it was enough. His grandmother died several years after the crossing. She had a long life and a clear mind to the end of it, which was a mercy. In the last weeks, when she was confined to her bed, and the family was coming through in shifts to sit with her, she said a number of things that people say in that condition, things that are partly present and partly somewhere else, memories surfacing without warning, old conversations reopening. Most of it was personal and private. But in one of the last coherent conversations Harlan had with her, she told him one more thing about the crossing. She said that the man who had come back different, and the one who had stopped there a long time ago and made it home but come back quiet, she said he had spent the rest of his short life hearing his name called at night. Not every night, but often enough that he could not sleep without listening for it. She said the calling was always from outside the house, from somewhere in the dark beyond the windows, and it was always in a voice he recognized, someone close to him, and it was never quite right. She said he knew it was not right, that the voice was close but wrong in some way he could not articulate, and he never answered it. And she thought that was the only reason he lasted as long as he did. She said it was the last thing she ever said about it. She changed the subject after and did not come back to it, and she died 11 days later. And that was the last time anyone in the family heard the full story from someone who remembered the original warning being put in place. Harlan heard that, and he understood it in a way that was physical, a recognition that moved through him like cold water. The voice close but wrong. Never quite right, never answered. He had heard something like that on the logging road 3 weeks after the crossing. His name, the version his grandmother used from the tree line once. He had not answered. He had walked faster and gotten to the truck and driven out. He did not know if not answering had protected him, or if he had simply been lucky, or if the thing on the logging road had been something else entirely. Some ordinary explanation that the context of the crossing had made him read as threatening. He had turned it over many times in 30 years, and he had not arrived at a conclusion that satisfied him. He had arrived at the detour, which was not a conclusion but was a practice, and the practice had held. The niece drove to the crossing herself, not long after finding the records at the county library. She did not plan it as a significant trip. She was in the area for an unrelated reason, and the road was on the map, and she had coordinates now, a precise location rather than a family story, and the researcher's instinct that had taken her to the microfilm took her to the bridge. She parked on the far side of the crossing, on the county route where the unpaved road met the pavement, and looked at the bridge from a distance. She did not drive onto it. She did not walk down to it. She sat in her car with the engine running and the heat on and the midday light flat and clear and completely ordinary, and she looked at it. It was a narrow bridge. older than she had imagined, though she was not sure why she had imagined it any particular age. It was just a bridge, wooden planking on a metal frame, the kind that counties replace when they fail and maintain when they do not. The creek below was audible from where she had parked. It was running clear and shallow over the rock in the bed, the November level low from a dry autumn, nothing dramatic about it. Birds in the trees on the far bank. Ordinary midday sounds. Nothing at the water's edge on either bank. Nothing crouching. Nothing still in the wrong way. She sat for about 10 minutes, then she put the car in drive and pulled back onto the county route. She went home the long way, not because she had planned to. She had not thought about the route home until she was already on the road and realized she had turned away from Millard Creek Road without consciously deciding to. The turn had been automatic. Her hands had simply not taken that road. She noticed it about a mile down and sat with it for a moment. She had grown up with the rule. She had heard it her whole life. She had never had a reason to follow it before because she had never driven that road after dark, had never had occasion to stop at the crossing, had never been in the position Harlan had been in. But she had turned away from it without thinking, in broad daylight, with nothing at the crossing and nothing on the road, and no practical reason to go the long way. She is not sure if she took the long way because she was scared, or because she had grown up with the rule, and some rules you follow without thinking. She thinks it might be the same thing. What the county records show is 2 names and a notice, and a gap in the cause of death documentation that might mean anything or nothing. What they do not show is whether the man found in the creek at the crossing in winter was the same man who had stopped there and come back different, or a relation, or an unrelated person who shared a surname. The records do not show what came back different in him, or what the voice outside his window sounded like, or whether the wrongness in it was the same wrongness Harlan heard on the logging road. The records do not show what is at the crossing. They show that people have known for a long time not to stop there, and that the ones who stop sometimes come home and sometimes do not, and the ones who come home are sometimes not quite what they were. Harlan is in his late 60s. He still hunts. He knows the land the way a person knows land they have worked and walked for 50 years. He is not a superstitious man. His grandmother was not a superstitious woman. The rule did not come from superstition. It came from something that happened, that was observed, that was found to repeat, and the rule was the practical response to the repetition. When he hunts alone now, on the family land, on the logging roads and the field edges and the timber cuts he has known his whole life, he pays attention to whether something calls his name using the version his grandmother used. He has an internal rule about it, one he has never said out loud because saying it out loud would require explaining it. If that version of his name is called by anything that is not his grandmother and not his wife, he leaves immediately, without looking toward the sound. He gets to the truck and he drives out. He has had to do that twice in 30 years, both times on the family land, both times on days when the weather was gray and the light was going and the ridge above the property was putting long shadows down through the timber. Both times he made it to the truck. He does not discuss what he heard on those days. He considers it private. He considers it a continuation of something that began on the bridge and that he has been managing ever since. The way you manage any ongoing condition. Carefully, without drama, with the practices that have been shown to work. The niece has not shown him the records from the county library. She has thought about it. She has picked up the phone to call him and put it down again more than once. She is not sure what showing him would accomplish. He already knows not to stop at the crossing. He already knows to leave when his grandmother's version of his name comes from somewhere it should not. He has known these things for 30 years, and he has practiced them, and he has been all right. What the records would add is the surname. The connection between the man who came back different and the man found in the creek. The shape of what the crossing does, or what uses the crossing, or what has been at the crossing long enough to have 2 deaths in its record and a family rule built around it spanning at least a century. She does not know if that shape would be useful to him, or if it would only be heavier. She thinks about what her grandmother said, or what Harlan told her that her grandmother said in the last conversation about it before she died. The man who came back different heard his name called at night for the rest of his short life, and he never answered it, and she thought that was the only reason he lasted as long as he did. She thinks about the word lasted. She thinks about the record sitting in a box at the county library and the notice on the microfilm and the surname written in her notebook. She has not shown it to Harlan. She is not sure she will. Some things you carry so other people do not have to. The last account in this collection is different from the others in one specific way. It did not happen outside. It did not happen on a trail or a road or a creek bank or in a hollow at 2 a.m. It happened in a cabin on a private road, 11 miles from the nearest town, on a weekend that was supposed to be quiet and restful and completely uneventful. The woman who submitted it asked that all identifying details be changed. They have been. What has not been changed is the door at the end of the hallway, because that is the part that does not have an alternate version. The listing showed 3 rooms. When they arrived, there were 4. The owner, when she called him, said there were 3. She counted again. There were 4. He told her she was mistaken. He said that slowly. And then there was a silence on the line that she did not like at all. She describes herself, in the written submission, as not a horror person, not a supernatural person, someone who needs an explanation before she believes something, and who has spent her adult life finding that explanations are usually available if you look carefully enough and ask the right questions. She is precise in her language. She uses qualifiers correctly. She says things like, according to what I observed, and to the best of my recollection in the same way someone uses them when they mean it, not as hedging, but as accuracy. She is a person who understands the difference between what she saw and what she concluded from what she saw, and she keeps those things separate in the account, which is part of why the account is worth taking seriously. Her name in this account is Marie. Her husband is Paul. Those are not their real names. They booked the cabin through an online rental platform in early autumn for a long weekend in late October. Friday arrival, Monday departure, 3 nights. Paul had finished a difficult year at work, the kind of year that accumulates rather than peaks. Stress building in layers until the layers are heavier than the person underneath them. And what they wanted was nothing. No itinerary, no reservations, no particular plans beyond firewood and books and sleeping past 7. The cabin looked right for that. 2 bedrooms, 1 common area, 1 bathroom, a porch with a view of the tree line, a wood stove in the main room. The listing price was lower than comparable properties in the area, which she noted at the time and attributed to the late season booking window. Properties in the mountains often dropped their rates after the leaf season peaked. It was October. The leaves were past. The cabin was on Briar Fork Road, a private unpaved road running off a county route, the kind of road that requires a specific destination because there is nothing on it except what you came for. The nearest town was 11 miles. There was no visible neighboring property from the cabin's approach. The owner had left a key in a combination lockbox attached to the porch railing and had sent the combination in a message through the rental platform 2 days before arrival. They did not meet him. His profile on the platform had a photograph and several reviews, all of them positive, all of them describing the cabin as peaceful and well-maintained. She had read the reviews before booking. She was the kind of person who read reviews before booking. They arrived in the late afternoon, the light already going amber the way October light goes in the mountains, the unpaved road soft from recent rain, and the trees on both sides of it bare enough to show the ridge above. The cabin was small and well built, the kind of structure that had been maintained rather than renovated, the original bones still present under the practical updates. A metal roof, a covered porch running the width of the front, windows on two sides of the main room. The wood stove was a good one, cast iron, installed on a proper hearth with a clean flue. She noted that because Paul would be using it, and a bad flue was a thing worth knowing about early. They unloaded the car together. 2 bags, a box of groceries they had stopped for on the way, a small cooler with things that needed refrigeration, a bag of firewood they had bought at a roadside stand 50 miles back, because the listing said firewood available on site, and she had learned from experience that available on site could mean many things, and it was better to have your own. Paul got the wood stove started while she put the groceries away, and oriented herself in the space the way she always did in a new place. Main room, kitchen, bathroom, bedroom 1, bedroom 2. The guest book was on the kitchen table. A cloth-covered journal, the kind rental properties keep for guests to log their stays. The entries going back several years in different handwritings and different colored pens. She read through it while the groceries were still on the counter. Most entries were brief. People describing a good weekend, a good hike, the drive-in, the weather, the view from the porch. One entry mentioned the porch swing as particularly nice in the mornings. There was no porch swing. She had walked the full length of the porch coming in. No swing, no hardware where a swing had been mounted. No marks on the ceiling boards where chains had hung. She noted it and moved on. Probably removed. Probably rotted out and taken down between that guest's stay and this one. These things happened with outdoor furniture. She put the guest book down and finished orienting herself. Main room, kitchen, bathroom at the end of the short hall. Bedroom 1 on the left, bedroom 2 across from it. And at the end of the hallway, past both bedrooms where the hall terminated, a door. She stopped. It was not in the listing. She had read the listing carefully, the way she read everything carefully, and it had described the property as 2-bedroom, 1 bathroom, 1 common area. The listing photographs showed the porch, the main room with the wood stove, the kitchen, both bedrooms, the bathroom. She had looked at every photograph. None of them showed a door at the end of the hall. The door was there. It was different from the other doors in the cabin. The bedrooms and the bathroom had standard hardware, the kind of lever handles and hinges you found in any rental property built or renovated in the last 30 years. This door had a different knob. Older, the glass and brass type, the kind that came with a skeleton key. The knob loose in its fitting in the way. Old hardware gets loose when the wood around it has expanded and contracted through too many seasons. The door was painted the same color as the walls, the same off-white that the rest of the hall was painted. But the paint was slightly different in texture around the frame, newer, as if the frame had been repainted more recently than the surrounding wall. She tried the handle. It did not turn. She told Paul. He came and looked at it and they agreed, reasonably, that it was storage. Private storage, the owner's things, the kind of locked space that rental property owners maintained for their own equipment and supplies and personal items. It was completely normal for a rental property to have a locked room. It was the owner's property. The room not being listed made sense if the owner considered it outside the rental space. The different hardware was odd, but old properties had old hardware in unexpected places. There was nothing actually strange about a locked door in a rental cabin. She called the owner anyway because she was thorough. She had the number from the platform messages. It rang 4 times before he answered. She explained that she was at the cabin, that they had arrived and everything looked good, and that she had a question about the door at the end of the hallway. The owner's response was slow in coming. Not a bad connection. The pause was before he spoke, not during. He said there was no door at the end of the hallway. He said the cabin had 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, and a utility closet near the kitchen, not at the end of the hall. She said she was standing in front of it right now. Another pause. Longer this time. Then he said she must be mistaken. The cabin did not have a door there. She looked at the door while he said this. The door was there. The glass and brass knob was there. The slightly different texture of paint around the frame was there. She was not mistaken. She said she understood, thanked him for his time, and ended the call. She looked at the door for a moment. The door did not do anything. It was a door. It was closed and locked, and it did not move or make a sound, and there was nothing inherently frightening about it, except for 2 things. It was there when the owner said it was not, and the owner had said it was not there slowly, in a way that suggested he was deciding what to say rather than simply correcting a mistake. Paul suggested they let it go. They had come here for quiet and rest, and the door was locked, and presumably whatever was behind it was staying behind it, and that was not their concern. He was right. She agreed with him. She went back to the kitchen and finished putting the groceries away and opened a bottle of wine, and they sat by the wood stove and talked about nothing in particular, and had the quiet evening they had come for. The cabin was cold when they went to bed. The wood stove had taken the main room to a comfortable temperature, but the bedroom was on the far side of the cabin and the heat moved slowly, and they piled the extra blankets from the closet onto the bed and got in and lay there in the particular comfortable heaviness of a warm bed in a cold room. Paul was asleep within minutes, the way he slept when he was genuinely tired rather than anxious tired, deeply and without moving. She lay awake a while longer. The cabin made sounds. Old structures do, the metal roof ticking as it shed heat, the porch board settling in the cold. Somewhere in the wall behind the kitchen, a pipe making a soft periodic knock. Normal sounds. She cataloged them the way she cataloged things, methodically, assigning each one to a source, until the catalog was complete and the sounds were familiar, and she could let them run without listening to each one. She was almost asleep when she heard it. A sound from the hallway. Soft, rhythmic. 4 knocks, a pause. 4 knocks, a pause. Not the pipe. The pipe was behind the kitchen and it knocked once every few minutes in an irregular way. This was from the hallway, and it was regular. 4, pause, 4, pause. Like something marking time, or marking something. Paul got up. She heard him cross the bedroom floor and open the bedroom door and go into the hallway. She lay still and listened. The knocking stopped the moment he entered the hall. His footsteps moved down the hall and back. He came back to bed. "Hallway's clear," he said. "The door is closed." She said, "Okay." He went back to sleep. Approximately 10 minutes later, the knocking started again. She lay in the dark and listened to it and did what reasonable people do with unexplained sounds in old buildings, which is find a reason. Pipes running differently now that the wood stove had shifted the temperature gradient in the cabin. Old wood responding to the cold outside and the heat inside in a way that produced a rhythmic sound. Wind finding a gap somewhere and creating a percussion against some interior surface. The reasons were available. She assigned the sound to one of them. Then Paul said quietly, without moving, without opening his eyes, "It's counting." She had not said that. She had been thinking it, the regularity of the intervals, the specific repetition, but she had not said it. He had arrived at it on his own, in the edge of sleep state where the verbal filter drops, and what comes out is what the brain is actually doing. She realized she had been thinking exactly the same thing. 4. Pause. 4. Pause. She lay in the dark with the blankets pulled up and the cold pressing in at the edges and the wood stove a long way away at the other end of the cabin, and she listened to the counting, and she did not go to sleep for a long time. They left at 5 in the morning. They did not wait for full light. They took everything they had brought in and they left the firewood, the cooler, and one bag of groceries on the kitchen table because Marie did not want to walk back down the hall again. She has not filed a complaint. She has not left a review. She is not sure what she would say. The second night had started the same way the first had ended, the knocking resuming at intervals, 4 and pause, 4 and pause. A sound so regular that after a while it became like a clock in the room, something you measured other sounds against. They did not go back into the hallway. They had discussed it quietly, lying in the dark, and they agreed without argument or drama that going into the hallway was not the thing to do. Paul pushed the bedroom dresser against the bedroom door, not the door at the end of the hall, their own door, the door to the room they were in, and they lay in bed with the blankets and the cold and the sound, and they waited. Around midnight, the knocking changed, not in volume, in pattern. The 4/4 rhythm stopped and was replaced by something longer, a single unbroken series of knocks that went on for approximately 15 seconds, and then stopped. Paul later described it as sounding like someone spelling something out. The rhythm of it suggesting letters, a code. She had heard the same thing. Neither of them could reconstruct the pattern afterward. They had both been lying still in the dark listening rather than counting, and the pattern had moved too quickly to hold on to in retrospect. They knew it was different. They knew it was longer and more complex than what had come before. They did not know what it said, if it said anything. Then it stopped. The silence that followed was different from the silences between the earlier knocking. Those had been pauses, intervals in a sequence. This was a stop, complete with a different texture, the kind of silence that is heavy with the absence of something that had been present. 20 minutes of it, maybe more. The cabin settling into an ordinary nighttime quiet that felt wrong after what had preceded it. She found herself breathing carefully, monitoring her own noise in a silence that felt like it was listening back. Then 3 knocks from inside the wall. Not from the hallway, not from the door at the end of the hall, from inside the wall of their bedroom, the shared wall between the bedroom and wherever the locked room was, the wall that separated them from the space the owner said did not exist. 3 slow knocks, evenly spaced from inside the wall, at approximately the height a standing person's hand would reach. She did not move. Paul did not move. Neither of them spoke for a long time after that. The silence came back and stayed. She lay on her back with her eyes open and she listened to the cabin breathe, the tick of the roof, the distant pipe, the cold pressing at the windows. And she did not hear the 3 knocks again, and she did not sleep. At 4:30 in the morning, she made the decision. Not because something had changed. Nothing had changed. The cabin was quiet, the wall was quiet, the hall was quiet. But because 4:30 was close enough to the edge of dawn that she could justify moving. She could see the window from the bed, the rectangle of it slightly less dark than it had been at midnight. The particular shade of pre-dawn that is not light, but is the withdrawal of full dark, and she decided that was enough. She told Paul they were leaving. He did not argue. He was awake. He had been awake for a long time. She needed the car keys, which she had left on the hook inside the kitchen door, on the other side of the cabin, on the other side of the hallway. She moved the dresser from the bedroom door herself, quietly, lifting the corner rather than dragging it so it did not scrape on the floor. She opened the bedroom door. The hallway was dark. The cabin had no nightlights, and the hallway had a single overhead fixture that she did not turn on. She could see the shape of the hall by the ambient light from the bedroom window behind her. The walls, the floor, the door frames of the bathroom, and the second bedroom on either side. And at the end of the hall, the door. She walked toward it, fast, not running. She kept her eyes on the kitchen doorway at the far end, on the hook where the keys were, not on the door. She was not going to look at the door. She had made that decision in the bedroom, and she maintained it in the hall. She did not maintain it completely. When she passed the door, she looked, not directly at it, not slowing, but the look that is involuntary when you are moving past something you have been told not to look at, the slight turn of the eye that you cannot always suppress. There was a line of light at the bottom of the door, not bright. A dim, steady glow, the specific warmth of a low lamp. The kind of light a room makes when there is a single incandescent bulb turned down or an old fixture on its lowest setting. Not a flashlight, not a phone screen, not the blue-white of an LED. Old warm light, steady, coming from under the door in a thin even line along the whole width of the gap. She got the keys from the hook. She walked back down the hall. She did not look at the door again. She did not run. She was specific about this when she wrote the account. She walked back to the bedroom. She told Paul they had the keys. She picked up her bag. She was precise and deliberate, and she did not run. And she has thought about that since, whether it was courage or whether it was the specific kind of calm that arrives when you have moved past fear into something quieter and more focused. The state in which the only relevant information is the distance between you and the car. They were in the car in 6 minutes. On Briar Fork Road in 8. The unpaved road was dark and narrow with the trees close on both sides and the headlights showing only the next 30 feet of it. But she drove it at a pace that was faster than careful and did not slow for the ruts and the soft shoulders. And after 8 minutes, the county route came up and the road changed under the tires from soft earth to pavement. On the county route in 15 minutes from the cabin, they did not speak until they were on the state highway with 10 miles of distance between them and Briar Fork Road. Then Paul pulled out his phone. He had pulled up the listing. The listing had been updated. Not the text, the photographs. The hallway photographs specifically. When they had booked the cabin, the hallway had been shown in 2 photographs, one looking toward the bedroom end and one looking back toward the kitchen. In both photographs, the hallway had been visible in its full length. That was how she had known, arriving at the cabin, that the listing showed a hallway without the door at the end, because she had seen the hallway in the photographs, and the photographs had not shown a third door. The photographs on the listing now were cropped. The end of the hallway was cut from the frame in both images. Not edited out, cropped, the frame simply ending before the hallway terminated. You could not see what was at the end of the hall because the photograph did not go that far. She had taken screenshots of the original listing before they left. She had done it before the trip, a habit she had developed for rental bookings, photographing the listing as it appeared when they booked, for reference in case of dispute. She pulled up the screenshots on her own phone and compared them to the updated listing photographs. In the original screenshots, the hallway was visible in full length. The end of the hall was in frame. The door was not visible in the photographs. The angle or the lighting had obscured it, or the photograph had been taken when the door was open and against the wall, or some other explanation. But the hallway extended to its full depth and terminated in what appeared to be a wall. Except the hallway in the photographs was shorter than the hallway in the cabin. She had not noticed it looking at the listing before the trip. She noticed it now, sitting in the car on the state highway with the original screenshots on her phone and Paul's phone showing the updated listing. The hallway in the photographs ended before where the door was. The physical hallway in the cabin was longer. By how much was difficult to say precisely, because photographs compressed distance in ways that made direct comparison unreliable. But the hallway in the photographs was shorter. The door was at a point the photographs did not reach, and the photographs did not reach it not just because of the cropping, but because the original photographs showed a hallway that ended before where the door would have been, as if the hallway, when the photographs were taken, did not extend that far. As if something at the end of the hall was not there when the photographs were taken. She noted it and stopped looking at the listing. She did not have an explanation for it. She was not going to manufacture one. She searched the cabin online when they got home. It took 3 days of intermittent searching to find anything beyond the rental platform listing. On a regional hiking and outdoor forum, in a post from 2 years earlier, a user had mentioned staying in a cabin on a private road in that county, and had written, almost in passing, about a room at the end of the hall that the owner said didn't exist. They had not pushed it, the user wrote. They had figured it was private. They had described the price as unusually low for the area. She messaged the forum user. The account appeared inactive. No response came. She called the owner one more time, a week after the trip. The number went to voicemail. She did not leave a message. She checked the listing the following month. The cabin was still available. The price was still low. There were no new reviews. The hallway photographs had been cropped further than they had been on the night she and Paul had sat in the car on the highway and compared them. The hallway in the current listing photographs was barely visible. Just a suggestion of a corridor behind the bathroom door, nothing that showed what the hall contained or how far it went. She has the screenshots. She has the original listing photographs showing a hallway that is shorter than the physical hallway in the cabin. She has Paul's description of the knocking pattern in the final series, which she corroborates, and her own description of the line of light at the bottom of the door. She does not have a photograph of the door. She had not thought to take one. By the time it became something she wished she had documented, she was no longer willing to go back to the hallway to do it. She regrets this with the specific regret of a precise person who failed to apply their own methods at the moment the methods mattered most. Paul has a recording. He had not made it deliberately. Earlier in the trip, before the second night, he had been leaving himself a voice memo on his phone, a reminder about something work-related, the kind of brief note people leave themselves on a Friday to preserve a thought for Monday. He had not closed the application properly afterward, and the voice memo had continued running in the background through the night, recording 43 seconds of ambient sound before his phone's storage management had stopped it. The recording captured the knocking. Clearly, the 4-4 pattern, 6 iterations of it, audible against the background of the cabin's ordinary nighttime sounds. And then, at second 31 of the recording, the 3 slow knocks from inside the wall. Then silence. Then Paul's voice, very quiet, saying her name. She has listened to the recording twice. The knocking is on it. The 3 knocks from the wall are on it. Paul's voice, saying her name, is on it. She has not listened to it a third time. She calls the owner of any rental property before booking now. She confirms the number of rooms. She asks specifically about every door in the property: bedrooms, bathrooms, closets, storage, utility. She asks whether the owner's description of the layout matches the listing, and she asks whether there are any locked rooms on the property and what they contain. She takes screenshots of all listing photographs before traveling. She does not rely on the listing being accurate at the time of arrival, Because she knows now that listings can be updated between booking and arrival, that photographs can be cropped further, that what was shown when you booked may not be what is shown when you check. These are reasonable precautions. They cost almost nothing. She applies them without embarrassment. She and Paul do not talk about the recording. It is on his phone. He has not deleted it, and she has not asked him to, and neither of them has said anything about why it is still there. It is simply still there. The voice memo app on his phone has 43 seconds of a cabin on Briar Fork Road at night, and she knows it is there the same way she knows the screenshots are on her phone, with a low, continuous awareness that does not require active thought. Months later, she booked a different cabin for a spring trip. Different county, different platform, different owner. She went through the listing photographs carefully, one by one, checking the hallway photographs specifically for depth, for what the frame included and what it cut off. She called the owner before booking. She asked about the rooms, the doors, the locked spaces. The owner answered everything clearly and without hesitation, and the answers matched the listing and the answers matched each other. She booked it. She hung up and sat for a moment. She did not feel relieved. She had expected to feel relieved. She had done everything correctly. She had asked the right questions and received the right answers, and the booking was made and there was nothing to worry about. But she did not feel relieved. She felt the absence of the feeling she was supposed to have, the gap where relief should have been and was not. She understood, sitting there, what the weekend on Briar Fork Road had actually cost her. Not the sleep, not the drive home in the dark, not the 43 seconds of audio on Paul's phone that she was not going to listen to a third time. It had cost her the assumption, the casual, unexamined assumption that a room is a room, and a door is a door, and a number in a listing means what it says. The assumption that ordinary spaces are exactly what they present themselves as, that a hallway ends where the photographs show it ending, that a locked door contains what the owner says it contains or nothing at all. She had carried that assumption her whole life without knowing she had it, the way you carry assumptions that have never been tested. The weekend on Briar Fork Road had tested it, and now she would not feel relieved until she was there in the spring cabin and had walked every hallway and opened every door that would open and counted them herself against the number the owner had given her. She thought this was probably permanent. She thought this was a thing that did not go back once it was changed. The cabin on Briar Fork Road is still listed. The price is still low. The hallway photographs have been cropped so far now that you cannot see the hall at all. The listing shows the porch, the main room, the wood stove, the kitchen, both bedrooms, the bathroom. It shows everything the listing has always shown. The hallway, what it contains, how far it goes, what is at the end of it. None of that is in the listing anymore. She does not play the recording a third time, but she has not deleted it either. Neither has he. They have not talked about why.